Yo, what's up everyone? It's N.O. Harry, and today we're checking out, what if Addams family declared blood feud on Dumbledore after finding Harry abused and hunted everyone. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Cupboard. The dare had been Pugsley's idea, which meant it was either going to be spectacularly boring or end with something on fire. Wednesday Addams had learned, over 13 years of living with her brother, that there was rarely a middle ground. Privet Drive, Pugsley had said, spreading a map across the dining room table with the enthusiasm of a general planning a siege. Perfectly normal suburban street. Nobody unusual. Nothing remotely interesting. I bet you can't last an hour without finding something worth investigating. Wednesday had looked at him. Then she had looked at the map. Then she had said, "What do I get when I win?" "If you win, when?" He'd conceded the point. She always won. So here she was, walking down Privet Drive in Surrey at 10:30 on a Wednesday morning. She'd always appreciated the coincidence of her name and the day, even if she refused to acknowledge it publicly, wearing her usual black dress, her hair in its customary twin braids, hands clasped behind her back, walking at a pace that suggested she had nowhere to be and was entirely unbothered by that fact. The street was exactly as advertised. Aggressively, militantly normal. Every house wore the same face, varied only in the color of the front door and the particular arrangement of garden gnomes on the lawn. The flowers were the kind that had been chosen not because anyone loved them but because they looked like the kind of flowers a respectable household should have. The cars in the driveways were practical and forgettable. Even the birds sounded like they were performing birdsong rather than actually singing anything. Wednesday found it deeply unsettling. Not in the way she usually appreciated unsettling things. This was the unsettling of erasure, of every individual impulse sanded down until all that remained was a smooth, identical surface. She'd read about places like this in sociology texts that Gomez kept in the library alongside the grimoires and the tax law volumes. Conformity as social contract. Normal as a weapon. She was passing number 4 when she heard it. Not a sound exactly. More like the absence of sound in a shape that shouldn't be silent. A held breath behind a door that was too small to be a room but too large to be a cupboard in which sat, she noticed now that she was paying attention, beneath the staircase on the interior side of the house. She could see it through the narrow window beside the front door, the kind of window meant to let light into a hallway, not to allow a girl on the pavement to notice what was happening inside a house she had no business observing. Wednesday Addams had never let "no business" stop her from doing anything. She looked at the window. She looked at the door of number 4. She looked back at the window and the small door visible beneath the stairs. There was a padlock on it. She could see that much. A padlock on the outside of what appeared to be a storage cupboard. Which meant whatever was inside couldn't let itself out. She was at the front door before she'd consciously decided to move. She knocked. 3 times, precisely. Not a polite knock and not an aggressive one, simply a knock that communicated she would stand here until someone answered. The woman who opened the door had the look of someone who had spent years trying to make her face less noticeable. She was thin in a way that suggested effort rather than nature, with a long neck and small, suspicious eyes that swept over Wednesday with the particular disdain of someone confronted with something they couldn't immediately categorize. "Yes," the woman said. "Good morning," Wednesday said. "I believe you have something behind that door under your stairs." The woman's eyes flickered, just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, toward the interior of the house. It was enough. "I don't know what you're talking about," the woman said. "This is private property." "You should, I can hear breathing," Wednesday said. Shallow breathing, which suggests either an injured animal or a small person who has learned to take up as little air as possible. The latter is considerably more interesting and considerably more concerning. She tilted her head. "I'm going to come inside now." "You most certainly are not." "I am," Wednesday said pleasantly, and walked through the door. She'd learned that tone from Morticia. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Simply a statement of fact delivered with the absolute certainty of someone for whom the word, no, had always been more of a starting point than a conclusion. The woman, Petunia, Wednesday would learn later, Petunia Dursley née Evans, sputtered behind her, hissing something about the nerve and calling the police, and who did she think she was? Wednesday ignored all of it with practiced ease and walked to the cupboard door under the stairs. The padlock was a standard model, cheap, the kind you bought at a hardware store without thinking too hard about what you'd use it for. Wednesday had picked harder locks when she was 7. She had it open in under a minute using a hairpin she kept specifically for purposes like this, because she was an Addams and an Addams was always prepared for a locked door. She opened the cupboard. The smell hit her first, unwashed clothes and something medicinal, and beneath both of those, the particular scent of a small space that had been slept in for years. Not weeks. Years. The boy inside was small. Too small, she noted clinically, for his age, which she estimated at 9 or 10, though the lack of proper nutrition had compressed him so that he looked closer to 7. He was sitting in the far corner of the cupboard with his knees drawn up to his chest and a book open across them, and when the door opened he flinched so hard he knocked the book to the floor. His hands came up automatically, instinctively, to cover his head. Wednesday looked at the hands covering his head. She looked at the flinch. She filed both observations in a part of her mind where she kept things that required action rather than analysis. "You can put your hands down," she said. "I'm not going to hit you." He lowered his hands slowly, with the wariness of someone who'd been promised things before. His eyes, she noticed, were very green and very large behind a pair of glasses held together at the bridge with what appeared to be tape. There was a scar on his forehead, oddly shaped, like a bolt of lightning had decided to make itself at home in his skin. He stared at her. "Hi," he said, which under the circumstances Wednesday found impressively composed. "Hi," she said. "How long have you been living in here?" He blinked. Nobody had ever asked him that directly, she could tell, not because he was surprised by the question but because he was surprised someone had framed it as living in here rather than staying in here or being put in here, as though she understood from the first moment that this was not a temporary situation. "As long as I can remember," he said. "Since before I started school." Wednesday turned to look at Petunia Dursley, who had followed her to the cupboard and was now standing in the hallway with her arms crossed and her face arranged in an expression of defiance that was undermined significantly by the slight tremor in her jaw. "How old is he?" Wednesday asked. "That's none of your, how old," Wednesday said again, with the patience of someone who was going to get the answer one way or another and was simply deciding how much effort it would require. 10, Petunia said, and seemed to regret it immediately. Wednesday did the calculation. 10 years old. In a cupboard. She turned back to the boy. "What's your name?" "Harry," he said. "Harry Potter." The name meant nothing to Wednesday Addams at that particular moment. She filed it anyway, because she filed everything. "My name is Wednesday Addams," she said. "Are you injured?" He looked at his arms, which was itself an answer. He pulled the sleeves of his oversized shirt down. "Not right now," he said, which was also an answer, and a worse one. "Can you walk?" "Yeah." "Do you want to come with me?" He looked at her with those enormous green eyes, and then he looked past her at Petunia Dursley, and Wednesday watched something happen in his face, a brief, rapid calculation of risks, a comparison of known dangers against unknown ones. She recognized that calculation. She'd seen it in the eyes of every small creature that had ever been brought to Addams Manor after some encounter with the world's casual cruelties. The particular arithmetic of survival. "Where would we go?" he asked. "My home," she said. "It's large. It has good locks on all the doors, which is more than can be said for yours. My parents are strange but not unkind. My brother is annoying but occasionally useful. We have a butler named Lurch who is 8 feet tall and mostly harmless. We also have a disembodied hand called Thing, who I mention now so that you are not startled later. Harry Potter stared at her for a long moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "That sounds better than here." "Most things are," Wednesday agreed, and held out her hand. He took it. Petunia Dursley made one attempt to stop them at the front door, a hand on Wednesday's arm, a sharp intake of breath, something beginning to form on her lips that might have been a threat or a plea or both. Wednesday looked at the hand on her arm. She looked up at Petunia. She said, in a voice that had driven grown adults to reconsider their choices, "You should know that my family is very particular about people who harm children. We remember. We are also patient." She removed Petunia's hand from her arm as you might remove a piece of litter from a coat. "Have a good morning." She walked Harry Potter down the front path of number 4, Privet Drive, and turned left onto the street, and did not look back, because she never did. Harry walked beside her with his hands in the pockets of trousers that were 3 sizes too large and didn't say anything for the better part of a block. Then he said, "Are you actually named Wednesday?" "Yes. Like the day. My mother says I was born on the day that had the most promise," she said. "I've never disagreed with her." He thought about that. "My parents died," he offered, in the tone of someone who had learned to deliver this information matter-of-factly because any other delivery invited a particular kind of uncomfortable adult sympathy he'd long since stopped expecting. "When I was a baby. My aunt never really, she didn't want me there. I don't think she wanted to be stuck with me." "No," Wednesday said. "She didn't." She paused. "Do you know why she was? She's my mum's sister. My only family, apparently." He said apparently with the faint bitterness of someone who'd been told a thing so many times they'd stopped believing it was the whole truth. "Family is a more complicated word than most people make it," Wednesday said. "My family has a different definition." "What's your definition?" She considered this seriously, as she considered everything. "The people who will come for you," she said finally. "Not the people you share blood with. The people who, when something happens to you, are already moving." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Nobody's ever moved for me before." "I know," Wednesday said. "I'm moving now." "That's a start." She pulled a mobile phone from her pocket, black, naturally, with a small skull charm on the case that Pugsley had given her as a birthday present, and called home. It rang once. Wednesday. Gomez's voice, warm and immediate, the voice of a man who answered the phone the same way whether it was 11 in the morning or 3 at night. "Papa," she said. "I need you to send the car." "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. I found something." "Something good or something that requires a shovel?" "A boy," she said. "He needs a family." She paused. "He might already be one." There was a brief silence on Gomez's end, not hesitation, she knew, but thinking, the rapid and precise thinking of a man who could read the weight of a sentence the way other people read novels. "Where are you?" She told him the street. She gave him the number of the house. "Lurch will be there in 15 minutes, Gomez said. "Wednesday." "Papa. You did the right thing." "I always do," she said, which wasn't arrogance so much as it was an observation, and hung up. Harry had been listening to the call with that particular brand of careful attention that children who've learned to monitor adult conversations for danger develop early. "Your dad sounds." He searched for the right word. "Intense," Wednesday offered. "I was going to say nice," Harry said, sounding slightly surprised by his own conclusion. "He's both," she said. "Most things worth anything are." Lurch arrived in 11 minutes, which set a new record. The car was the Addams family car, long, black, older than most of the buildings on Privet Drive, with chrome details and windows tinted just past the legal limit and a general air of having attended several funerals as the guest of honor. Lurch himself unfolded from the driver's seat with the particular deliberateness of someone very large who had learned to make his size less alarming through slower movements, which only partially worked. Harry stared up at him. Lurch looked down at Harry. He made a sound, not words exactly, more of a resonant, mournful rumble that served as his version of greeting. He said hello, Wednesday translated. Hello, Harry said. He kept staring. He's very tall. 8 feet 2, Wednesday confirmed. He used to be taller but he had some structural issues in his 30s. You get used to him quickly. He makes excellent pancakes. Lurch made another sound, lower and more emphatic. He also makes excellent waffles, Wednesday amended. He feels strongly about not being defined solely by his pancake output. Harry, to his own evident surprise, laughed. It was a small laugh, unpracticed, like something he kept in a drawer and didn't use often, but it was real and it was there, and Wednesday noted it with satisfaction. The drive to Addams Manor took 40 minutes. Harry sat in the back seat beside Wednesday and watched Surrey give way to the kind of English countryside that normal families drove through on their way to the coast, and then to a different kind of countryside that was less manicured and more honest, and then to a long driveway lined with dead trees that had the good sense to look dramatic about it. The house appeared at the end of the driveway in the way that houses like Addams Manor always appeared, all at once and somehow larger than seemed physically justified, all dark stone and Gothic spires and windows that seemed to hold light differently than ordinary windows, as though they were keeping some of it for later. Thorny things grew up the walls with the enthusiasm of plants that had never been told no. A gargoyle on the left parapet appeared to track the car as it pulled up. It watches, Wednesday said, following Harry's gaze. It's mostly decorative. Mostly. It's. Harry searched again. He seemed to do that a lot, search for the word that was both true and didn't sound ungrateful. It's brilliant, he said finally, and meant it. They were barely through the front door, a door which was, Wednesday noted with approval, already open because her family had heard the car, when the entrance hall filled with Addams. Gomez came first, because he always came first, moving with the rapid energy of a man for whom stillness was a temporary state. He was immaculately dressed even at this hour, dark suit, hair combed back, the perpetual enthusiasm in his face dialed to its particular setting of something interesting is happening, which for Gomez was almost always the highest setting available. He stopped when he saw Harry, and the enthusiasm underwent a rapid and perceptible transformation into something quieter and more deliberate. He crouched down, which brought him to Harry's approximate eye level, and looked at the boy with the full attention of a man who knew how to give his full attention. Harry, who was not accustomed to being looked at by adults with anything other than irritation or negligence, went very still. You must be the boy my daughter found, Gomez said. His voice was warm in the way of a fireplace, genuinely warming and also capable, under the right conditions, of burning things down. I'm Gomez Addams. This is my house and everyone in it is your friend until proven otherwise. Harry didn't know what to do with that. He said, I'm Harry. Harry Potter. Gomez's face changed, very briefly, a flicker, something passing through his dark eyes like a shadow moving across water. He knew the name, Wednesday could tell. Most adults in a certain world would know the name, she suspected, though she didn't yet know why. Gomez absorbed the information, filed it, and let none of it alter the warmth in his expression. A good name, he said simply. Morticia materialized from the hallway the way she usually did, apparently from nowhere, moving without sound, tall and pale and composed in a way that suggested the universe had simply arranged itself around her. She wore black, as always, the kind of black that absorbed light and returned something else. Her dark hair fell like a curtain. She looked at Harry with eyes that were deep and quiet and saw things with uncomfortable accuracy. She sat on the bottom stair to bring herself to his level and regarded him. Harry looked back at her. He was not afraid of her, Wednesday noticed, which itself was interesting. Most new people were afraid of Morticia, at least briefly. But Harry had been raised around fear of a different variety, the clenching mundane kind, and this was something else entirely. Are you hungry? Morticia said. Yes, Harry said, and then seemed embarrassed by the admission, as though wanting food was a character flaw he'd been taught to hide. Morticia smiled. It was her slow smile, the one that didn't try to be reassuring because it didn't need to be. "Good," she said. "Lurch will bring something. You can sit in the kitchen while he does, or the library, or wherever feels right. There are no wrong rooms in this house." She paused. "There are a few rooms I'd suggest avoiding until you've been here at least a week, but someone will point those out." The east wing, Pugsley offered helpfully from the top of the stairs, where he'd been sitting and watching the proceedings with open curiosity. He was round-faced and blond and wearing what appeared to be a homemade explosive harness, which he'd clearly taken off before coming to the stairs but which had left certain scorch marks on his shirt. The east wing gets weird on Tuesdays specifically. Nobody's quite sure why. Harry looked up at Pugsley. "How weird?" "Last Tuesday it turned Fester into a pelican for about 4 hours, Pugsley said. He didn't mind but it made dinner complicated. From somewhere deeper in the house, a voice, raspy, slightly singed, shouted, "I enjoyed being a pelican." The perspective was excellent. That was Uncle Fester, Wednesday provided, watching Harry's face as he processed all of this. He was doing the work of recalibrating, she could tell, taking everything he knew about how houses worked and families worked and adults worked and quietly moving it to one side to make room for something that didn't fit any of his previous categories. She approved of this. It was a good cognitive skill. Thing arrived on the kitchen doorframe, tapping twice to announce itself, and Harry saw the disembodied hand and made a noise that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a laugh but occupied the interesting territory between them. "That's Thing," Wednesday said. "He helps with correspondence and occasionally emotional support. He's expressive for a hand." Thing waved. Harry, after a moment, waved back. Gomez watched this exchange with an expression that Wednesday recognized as the one he wore when he was very moved but had decided to think rather than feel for the moment. He looked at her over Harry's head. She gave him a small nod, the nod that meant "I know, I'll explain later, it's important." He nodded back. Lurch fed Harry. This deserves more than a sentence because what Lurch produced from the kitchen in under 20 minutes was extraordinary. Eggs and toast and bacon and fresh fruit and a cup of tea that was somehow exactly the right temperature, and he set it all down in front of Harry at the kitchen table without ceremony and then retreated to a respectful distance to do unnecessary things to the counter. Harry ate like someone who was trying to eat slowly because he'd been taught that taking more than your share was wrong, and kept losing the battle with hunger and eating faster, and then catching himself and slowing down again. Wednesday sat across from him and ate nothing, which was her usual state before noon, and watched. "You don't have to portion it," she said. "There's more." He looked up. "More what?" "More everything. If you want more eggs, there are more eggs. If you want to eat until you're actually full, which I suspect you haven't done in some time, that is an acceptable thing to happen at this table." He stared at her. Then he looked at his plate. Then, slowly, deliberately, he took a third piece of toast. It was a small thing. Wednesday added it to her list of important observations. Gomez came into the kitchen while Harry was eating, with the casual air of a man wandering through on business, though Wednesday knew perfectly well he had no business in the kitchen and had come specifically to be near the boy without making it obvious. He poured himself a cup of coffee, leaned against the counter, and said, "So, Harry, what do you like?" Harry looked up from his toast. The question seemed to catch him completely off guard, as though the concept of preference had not been a regular feature of his life. What do you enjoy? What interests you? When you have a free moment, do you have free moments?" "Sometimes," Harry said. "What do you do with them?" Harry thought about this with genuine effort, as though he was searching through storage rooms for an item he wasn't sure he'd kept. "I read," he said. "At the library. When my aunt lets me go. And I." He hesitated. "Strange things happen around me sometimes. I don't know why. My aunt and uncle say it's wrong, but I like it. When it happens." Gomez's eyes had sharpened at the word strange in a way that Harry, focused on his toast, didn't catch. Wednesday caught it. What kind of strange things? Gomez asked, in a tone carefully calibrated to be merely curious. Once I was on the roof of my school, Harry said. I didn't want to be there, some boys were chasing me, and then I just was on the roof. I don't know how. He paused. The windows in my aunt's kitchen explode sometimes when she shouts at me. She said I did it on purpose, but I don't know how I would. He looked up. Is that something that happens to other people? Gomez looked at Wednesday. Wednesday looked at Gomez. She had told him the boy's name. She could see him connecting what he knew, which was, she suspected, more than he'd let on yet, with what he was hearing. The pieces assembling. The picture forming. Yes, Gomez said, in a voice that had gone very calm and very deliberate. It happens to people like you. Specific people. There's a word for it. He put down his coffee cup. How about after you've eaten and had a rest, we have a proper conversation about all of this? About the strange things. About everything, Gomez said. About who your parents were. About what you are. About why you were where my daughter found you, and what that means, and what we're going to do about it. He smiled, and it was a warm smile, a real one, and also one that contained somewhere within it the specific quality of a man who had already made several decisions and was going to see them through. We are going to do something about it. Harry stared at him. You believe me? About the strange things? Absolutely, Gomez said. Strange things are our particular specialty. After Harry had been shown to a room, an actual room, with a bed and a window and a door that locked from the inside, which Wednesday watched him register with an expression she was careful not to make much of, she found her father in his study. The study was a room that suited Gomez perfectly, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, maps pinned to one wall, a fencing foil hanging near the door, stacks of legal documents in an order that appeared chaotic and was in fact precise. He was standing at his desk with the particular stillness he only adopted when he was thinking hard, which meant the thinking was significant. You know who he is, Wednesday said. Harry Potter, Gomez said. Yes. He turned to look at her. You know the name? I didn't. I do now. Tell me. So he did. He sat down behind his desk and told her what he knew, the things that circulated in certain circles, the things that had been shared carefully and incompletely because the people controlling the narrative wanted it controlled. A boy who had survived something unsurvivable. A scar that shouldn't exist. A world that had been told he was safe, protected, loved, growing up happy somewhere with his family. Wednesday listened. When he was done she said, he was in a cupboard. I know. He flinched when I opened the door. Both hands over his head. He's been hit. I know, Gomez said, and the two words, in his voice, were not an acknowledgement but a verdict. There were locks on the outside of the door, Wednesday continued. Padlocks. A child doesn't get locked into a space from the outside by accident. She paused. Somebody put him there. And somebody with considerably more authority than the Dursleys, left him there. The silence in the study was the specific silence of a conversation that has reached a decision without having to say it out loud. I'm going to need to look into his family history, Gomez said. His mother sighed. I have reasons to believe. He picked up a letter opener and turned it in his fingers, the gesture he made when he was organizing information. There are old bloodlines, Wednesday. Ones that go back farther than either world typically maps. I have a feeling, and my feelings are rarely wrong about these things, that Harry Potter is not simply a guest in this house. Wednesday considered this. You think there's a connection? I think there are a great many things about this situation that are going to become very clear, very quickly, Gomez said. And when they do, he set the letter opener down with a small, precise click. I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with before I decide what to do about it. And if it's what you think. He looked at her. The smile that came onto his face then was not the warm smile he'd worn for Harry in the kitchen. This one was older and quieter and contained absolutely no doubt. "Then God help whoever is responsible," Gomez Addams said pleasantly, "because we won't." Wednesday returned to Harry's room after an hour to check on him. She knocked, because she believed in knocking, and he said come in the careful voice of someone still not sure what that meant in this house. She opened the door and found him sitting on the bed with his hands folded in his lap, looking at the room around him with the particular expression of someone cataloging evidence. "The room is yours," she said. "Not temporarily. Not for now. You can put things in the drawers." He looked at the drawers. "I don't have anything to put in them." "We'll get you things." "You don't have to." "I know we don't have to," Wednesday said. "We want to." That is a meaningful distinction that I'd encourage you to understand sooner rather than later, because it will save you considerable discomfort. He looked at her. He had a way of looking at people that was assessing without being hostile, reading without being rude, the look of someone who had survived by being accurate about people and hadn't yet decided whether accuracy was going to help or hurt him here. "Why did you come into the house?" he asked. "You didn't know me. You didn't have to do anything." Wednesday was quiet for a moment. She moved a small black pillow out of the way and sat on the chair near the window. Outside, the garden was doing its beautiful, thorny best against a gray English sky. "I heard you," she said. "Breathing. In a space that should have been empty." She paused. "I don't believe in leaving things in spaces where they shouldn't be. Whatever is there deserves to be accounted for." "I've been in that cupboard my whole life," Harry said. "Nobody ever heard me before." "Nobody was listening," Wednesday said. He absorbed this. Then, "Are you always this, I don't know the right word. Direct?" "Yes," she said. "I find it saves time." "Is it uncomfortable?" "No," he said, with some surprise. "It's actually." He looked around the room again, at the window and the door that locked from inside and the drawers that were empty and waiting. "It's nice," he said. "Knowing where I stand." "You stand here," Wednesday said simply. "Until you decide otherwise, which you're welcome to do at any time, you're here, and this is where you stand." She stood up. "Dinner is at 7. It will be strange. Not in a bad way. You should know that going in." "Wednesday," he said, as she reached the door. She looked back. "Thank you," he said. For the door. For opening it." She regarded him for a moment in the fading light of the afternoon, this small boy with his enormous green eyes and his borrowed clothes and his hand-shaped scar, this boy who had been locked away for reasons she didn't yet fully understand and who had, nevertheless, when a door opened to something unknown, reached out and taken the offered hand. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Wait until you see what comes next." She closed the door quietly behind her. Down the hall, in his study, she could hear her father on the phone. She didn't catch all of it, the murmur of his voice, the particular cadence he used when he was being both charming and implacable. She caught one sentence clearly: "Going to want to have all of this in front of me before I make any decisions, Desmond, but I'll tell you one thing absolutely: for more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now." Chapter 2, Blood and Ink. The Addams family library was not a room that apologized for itself. 3 stories tall, accessible by a spiral staircase that had opinions about which direction it wanted to turn depending on the day, lined with shelves that went all the way to a ceiling painted to resemble a night sky except the stars moved and occasionally rearranged themselves into shapes that weren't constellations so much as warnings. Gomez had built the collection over 40 years with the specific intent of having, on any given shelf, exactly the book he needed at exactly the moment he needed it. Whether this was careful curation or something else was a question the family had stopped asking. He'd been in there since 4 in the morning. Harry found him at 7:30, following the smell of coffee and the light of several candles burning at a large oak table covered in open books, loose parchment, ink-stained notes, and what appeared to be 3 different family trees drawn in 3 different colors on a single enormous sheet of paper. Gomez was standing at the table with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, which was the Gomez Addams equivalent of a war footing. He looked up when Harry appeared at the top of the spiral staircase, hesitating on the last step in the oversized pajamas that Morticia had materialized from somewhere the previous night, black, naturally, with small silver moons that actually moved, which Harry had discovered at 2 in the morning when he woke up and couldn't sleep and lay watching them orbit across the fabric. "Harry," Gomez said, with the immediate warmth of a man who had been waiting for this moment. "Good. Come down. Have coffee." "I'm 10, Harry said. "Hot chocolate, then." Lurch. The shout went down the staircase and presumably through the walls. Somewhere below, a resonant acknowledgement. "Are you rested?" "Sort of," Harry said, coming down the last step and navigating toward the table. He'd slept better than he could remember sleeping, the bed had been extraordinary, and the door had been locked from the inside, and he'd spent perhaps 30 minutes just experiencing the locked door before his body finally decided it was safe enough to actually sleep. "What are all these?" He was looking at the family trees. Gomez moved aside to let him see properly. "This one," Gomez said, pointing to the tree in black ink, "is the Addams line. Going back approximately 800 years, at which point the records become more mythological than genealogical, so I stopped there for professional integrity." He moved his finger. "This one, in the red, is the Evans line. Your mother's family. Muggle-born witch, that means she was born to non-magical parents but was very much magical herself. Her power was significant. Her lineage, however," he tapped the tree, "goes back farther than your average Muggle family. And 3 generations back, on the maternal side, there is a name." Harry leaned in. The name was there in red ink, circled once, Evangeline Addams, born in 1889. He looked at Gomez. "Addams?" "Married out," Gomez said. "Took her husband's name, Evans, settled in the north of England, raised a family. The connection thinned over generations, as it does, but blood, Harry, has a longer memory than most people credit it with." He put his hand flat on the paper. "You are not a stranger to this house. You are family. Distant, yes. Diluted by time and marriages and the ordinary chaos of genealogy, but family nonetheless." His eyes, dark and absolutely direct, met Harry's. "In this house, that is not a small thing." Harry looked at the name. Evangeline Addams. He reached out, slowly, and touched the circle around it with one finger. "My mum," he said. "Descended from her, yes. My mum was related to you." "In the way that matters," Gomez said. "Blood feud law, old magic, older than most governments and considerably more reliable, recognizes consanguinity through the maternal line at up to 6 degrees of separation. You are 4 degrees from Wednesday." He paused. "Which means, under those laws, that what was done to you," his voice didn't change in temperature exactly, but something underneath it shifted, like a current moving below the surface of very still water. "What was done to you was done to family." Lurch arrived with hot chocolate and more coffee, and they sat at the table, Harry in a large chair that he tucked his feet up into, Gomez opposite him with his coffee and his notes, and Gomez asked him to talk. Not about the bad things, not yet, just about what he knew. His parents. What he'd been told. What he'd worked out for himself, which Gomez made clear he suspected was considerably more than what he'd been told. Harry talked. It took a while, and it was halting in places, and he wrapped both hands around his mug of hot chocolate and didn't look up for most of it, but he talked. His parents killed by a dark wizard when he was a baby. Himself somehow surviving. Sent to his aunt's house immediately, no explanation, no choice. Growing up knowing he was different without knowing why. The strange things that happened. The way his aunt and uncle looked at him when the strange things happened, not with fear exactly, but with something that wanted to erase him, that was made profoundly uncomfortable by his existence and managed that discomfort through systematic cruelty. Gomez listened to all of it without interrupting. He had a way of listening that was total, not waiting for his turn to speak, not preparing responses, just receiving everything with his full attention. When Harry finished, Gomez was quiet for a moment. "Do you know the name Albus Dumbledore?" he asked. Harry shook his head. "He is the headmaster of a school called Hogwarts," Gomez said. "The most prestigious magical school in Britain. He is also considered, by the majority of the wizarding world, to be the greatest wizard of his age. A man of extraordinary intelligence and power, with a reputation for wisdom and moral authority that has been built carefully over several decades." He paused, and the pause had weight. "He is the one who placed you with the Dursleys." Harry's hands tightened slightly on the mug. "Not accidentally," Gomez continued. "Not without information. He knew your aunt's character. He had access to your parents' wills, both of them, as it turns out, which contained explicit instructions that you were not to be placed with the Dursleys under any circumstances. Your father's family had options. There were others. Sirius Black, your godfather, who was imprisoned on charges that," Gomez glanced at his notes, "which appear increasingly questionable upon examination. Remus Lupin. Frank and Alice Longbottom, before their incapacitation." There was a list. Harry had gone very still. He ignored a list. "He overrode a list," Gomez said. "Actively, legally, using his position on the Wisengamot, which is their governing body, to have himself named Magical Guardian, which gave him authority over your placement. He then placed you with the Dursleys specifically because your aunt, your mother's blood relation, could anchor what are called blood wards, a protection spell tied to the place you call home." He sat back. "The spell required you to regard Privet Drive as home. Dumbledore's letter to your aunt, which I have a copy of, obtained through certain channels I won't bore you with, told her that if she kept you, she would be keeping her sister's sacrifice alive. It said you needed to be there. It did not mention that the wards required something of you in return. It did not mention the wills. It did not mention your godfather. It told her she was protecting you and said nothing about the conditions of that protection." Harry stared at him. Something was moving behind his green eyes that was not quite anger yet. It was the thing before anger, the thing where you understand something clearly for the first time and the clarity itself is painful. "He knew," Harry said. "He knew what she was like." "I don't have direct evidence of regular visits," Gomez said carefully. "But I have evidence of monitoring. Magical monitoring, very subtle, the kind placed at a distance. He was aware of your location at all times. He was aware of your condition in the general sense." Another pause. "Whether he knew about the specific details of your living situation, I was in a cupboard," Harry said. "Yes," Gomez said. "You were." The silence that followed was the kind that you could build something in. Harry looked down at his hot chocolate. His jaw was working slightly, the way jaws do when you are feeling something large and haven't decided whether to let it out. "Why," he said finally. "Why go to all that trouble? Why put me there at all?" Gomez picked up a sheet of parchment from the table, one he'd clearly been saving. He set it down in front of Harry. It was a copy of something, handwritten in a spidery script that wasn't Gomez's own. "This is a partial record of a prophecy," he said. "Delivered to Dumbledore himself, some years before your birth. I'll spare you the full mystical phrasing. Prophecies are dramatic creatures and this one is no exception, but the substance is this: a child born as a certain dark wizard was at his most powerful would have the ability to defeat him. Dumbledore believed that child was you." "A prophecy," Harry repeated. "About you and Voldemort, the dark wizard who killed your parents. The one you somehow survived." Gomez laced his fingers together. "Dumbledore believed, and continues to believe, that you have a role to play. A specific, predetermined role. He spent 10 years, Harry, constructing the conditions he believed were necessary to produce the right kind of person to fulfill that role. A beat. He needed someone's certain qualities. Brave but not arrogant. Loyal. Willing to sacrifice himself. He believed, and this is where the man's considerable intelligence becomes his considerable blind spot, that hardship was the appropriate forge. Harry was very quiet. He needed a hero, Wednesday said. Neither of them had heard her arrive. She was standing at the foot of the spiral staircase in her black dress with a book under one arm, watching both of them with the particular expression that meant she had been listening for some time and had decided to enter the conversation. He needed a specific kind of hero, she continued, moving to the table and sitting down. Humble. Selfless. Accustomed to not having things, so he wouldn't flinch at giving them up. Grateful for whatever crumbs he was handed because he'd been handed so few. She looked at Harry with those dark, direct eyes. He didn't put you in that cupboard because he was careless. He put you there because he was careful. Harry looked at her. Then at Gomez. Then back at the family trees. He made me, Harry said. He tried to, Wednesday said. The question is what you make of yourself now. From downstairs came the sound of Morticia's voice and Pugsley's response, and somewhere beneath both of them the low rumble of Lurch beginning the work of breakfast, and the house doing its ordinary morning things all around this extraordinary moment, and Harry sat in the library of Addams Manor at 8:30 with his cold hot chocolate and the knowledge of what had been done to him settling around his shoulders like something heavy that was also, he found, something clarifying. What are you going to do? He asked Gomez. Gomez unfolded from his chair and walked to his desk at the far end of the library where several sheets of thick cream parchment waited alongside a pen that was not a quill, because Gomez Addams was a man of precise tastes and wrote his most important documents in a particular ink of his own manufacture that dried black as pitch and did not fade for 100 years. I am going to write some letters, Gomez said. He said it the way you'd say I'm going to make dinner or I'm going to take a walk, casually, pleasantly, with the complete relaxation of a man entirely at ease with the situation. To Gringotts Bank, which handles wizarding inheritance and is notably independent of both the Ministry and Dumbledore's influence. To the British Wisengamot, specifically to the office that handles guardianship disputes. To the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, because they should have the documentation. And one more. He picked up the pen. Directly to Albus Dumbledore. Personal delivery. Harry watched him begin to write. The ink moved across the parchment in Gomez's strong, flowing hand, unhurried, perfectly assured. What does the one to Dumbledore say? It is a formal declaration, Gomez said, not looking up. In the old tradition. It states that the Addams family, by right of blood connection to Harry James Potter, the connection being documented and witnessed, formally claims him as family. It states that the manner of his care, placement, and treatment constitutes, under ancient magical law, a blood offense against the Addams line. He paused, considered a word, replaced it with another. And it formally declares, witnessed and registered, a blood feud against the party responsible for that offense. The library was very quiet. A blood feud, Harry said. It's old magic, Wednesday said, sitting beside him now, her book set aside. Older than most of the laws either world currently operates by. When one family wrongs another through the harm of blood kin, genuine harm, deliberate and documented, the wronged family has the right to declare a feud. It's not a declaration of war exactly. She thought about it. It's more like a declaration of accounting. Everything that was done gets counted. And then it gets answered. Answered how? Gomez looked up from his writing, and for just a moment his smile was something you'd be wise to take seriously. However we determine is appropriate, he said. That's rather the point. The letters were finished by mid-morning. Gomez sealed them himself with the Addams seal, a hand reaching from the ground, reaching upward, in black wax, each one, and Thing took them from the study with the efficiency and dignity of a courier who had never once failed a delivery. The letter to Gringotts went by owl, because Gringotts had very particular preferences about correspondence. The letter to the Ministry went through official channels, filed with the appropriate registrar, time-stamped, and accompanied by 17 pages of genealogical documentation that Gomez had somehow assembled overnight. The letter to Dumbledore went directly, by a method that was neither owl nor standard post but which arrived nonetheless, as Gomez's letters always did, with reliable precision. The letter to Dumbledore was the shortest of all of them. It said, "Dear Headmaster Dumbledore, I write to inform you that Harry James Potter is currently under the protection of the Addams family, whose connection to Mr. Potter by maternal bloodline has been documented and filed with Gringotts Bank as of this morning. I further write to inform you that the Addams family is aware of the circumstances of Mr. Potter's placement and treatment at 4, Privet Drive, Surrey, and considers those circumstances a blood offence of the first degree. The blood feud is declared. The accounting begins today." With considerable warmth, Gomez Addams Albus Dumbledore, 300 miles north in his circular office at Hogwarts, read the letter twice. Then he set it down very carefully on his desk and sat with his hands folded and his half-moon spectacles sitting slightly lower than usual on his long nose and thought for a very long time. He had not encountered the Addams family directly before. He knew of them, because he knew of most things, a family of considerable age and considerable power, operating primarily in the Muggle world but connected to the magical one in ways that didn't fit standard categories. Not dark wizards in the conventional sense, though they made certain committees nervous. Wealthy, influential, and possessed of a particular ethical code that was entirely consistent and entirely their own. He had not anticipated this. He had anticipated, over the years, most things. He was a man who anticipated. He had anticipated that Harry would eventually be retrieved from Privet Drive, by him, under his control, at a time of his choosing, in the way he'd planned. He had anticipated resistance from various parties over the years. He had not anticipated a 10-year-old girl walking down Privet Drive on the wrong day. He thought about the blood feud declaration. He thought about what it meant legally, magically, practically. He thought about Gomez Addams, about whom he knew several things, none of them particularly comforting. He needed to go to Addams Manor. He needed to go carefully, and he needed to go soon, and he needed to bring the right people, and he needed to be very, very convincing. Albus Dumbledore was generally very, very convincing. He pressed his fingertips together and began to plan. Back in Surrey, or rather, far from Surrey, in the comfortable darkness of Addams Manor, Harry was sitting in the garden. Not the front garden with its theatrical dead trees, but the back garden, which was its own ecosystem of odd and beautiful things, a sundial that occasionally showed the wrong time, which Pugsley insisted was because it had opinions, a tree that had grown into a shape that suggested it was trying to tell you something, raised beds full of plants that weren't listed in any standard horticultural catalogue. Wednesday had brought him here after the morning's library session, with the stated purpose of fresh air, though fresh was a relative term in a garden where several of the plants exhaled something that wasn't precisely oxygen but wasn't harmful either. "Are you processing?" Wednesday asked. She was sitting on a stone bench with her book open again but not reading it. "Is that what it looks like?" "You've been staring at the same flower for 6 minutes," she said. "It's a reasonable inference." Harry looked at the flower, which was deep purple and moved against the wind rather than with it. "I'm trying to decide how I feel," he said. "About all of it." "That's ambitious," Wednesday said. "Most people can only manage how they feel about one part of something at a time." "Are you angry?" Harry asked. "About what he did?" "About Dumbledore?" Wednesday considered this with her usual careful honesty. "I don't generally experience anger the way most people describe it," she said. "I experience clarity. When something is wrong, I see it very clearly. What was done to you is clearly wrong. The person who did it will be clearly held accountable." She turned a page she hadn't been reading. "My father is angry. He won't show it as anger. He'll show it as action, which is considerably more effective." "Your dad," Harry said, with something in his voice that Wednesday catalogued as wistfulness adjacent. He stopped. "Tried again. He just decided. Just like that. That I was family and he was going to do something about it. That is how he does things, yes. My Uncle Vernon used to say that people who got involved in other people's business were looking for trouble, Harry said. He said it a lot. Mainly when neighbors asked why I was locked outside in winter. Wednesday looked at him with eyes that were direct and not unkind. Your Uncle Vernon, she said, is a coward wearing the costume of a respectable man. Most people who use the phrase other people's business are the people whose business is being protected by other people's silence. She paused. My father doesn't particularly care about whose business things are. He cares about whether things are right. Harry absorbed this. He looked at the purple flower. He looked at his hands, small hands, the knuckles slightly scarred in a way that had specific causes she hadn't asked about yet. Do you think, he started. Stopped. When he said I was family. Did he mean it? My father, Wednesday said, does not say things he doesn't mean. I believe this is the most important thing I can tell you about him. He will tell you exactly what he intends and he will do exactly what he says. He has never in my life been otherwise. The garden was quiet around them, the peculiar quiet of a place that was full of life but all of it attending to its own business. Somewhere beyond the walls, the ordinary world continued its ordinary operations, entirely unaware that in this particular garden something had shifted. A door had been opened. A letter had been sent. An accounting had begun. Wednesday, Harry said. What's a blood feud, really? Not the legal definition. What does it look like? She was quiet for a moment, turning the question over. It looks like my father, she said, deciding that something is going to be answered. And then answering it, completely, in every available venue, by every available means, until the accounting is settled. She looked at him. He will dismantle everything Dumbledore used to justify what he did. Every legal protection. Every institutional authority. Every assumption that the wizarding world makes about his right to control your life. He will take it apart piece by piece with the patience and precision of a man who finds this kind of work genuinely enjoyable. And Dumbledore? Harry said. Dumbledore will come here, Wednesday said with certainty. Probably soon. He won't be able to resist trying to talk his way through it. He's a man who has always solved his problems by being the most reasonable person in the room. She smiled her small, specific smile. He has not been in a room with my family before. She was right on all counts. Dumbledore arrived 2 days later. In the intervening time, Addams Manor did what Addams Manor did best, which was to absorb a newcomer into itself. Harry met Fester properly, Uncle Fester, who immediately tried to teach him 3 things: how to make a small explosive device from household ingredients, how to light a light bulb in your mouth, and how to win at chess through psychological intimidation. Harry found the chess lesson unexpectedly compelling and beat Fester twice, which delighted Fester enormously and confirmed something Gomez had been quietly suspecting since the library. He met Thing, really met it, found it one evening in the kitchen while he couldn't sleep, writing what appeared to be a strongly worded letter to a magazine about an inaccuracy in a published article. Thing noticed him, stopped writing, and produced from somewhere a small notepad on which it wrote, "Hello. Can't sleep?" "No," Harry said. "Normal here," Thing wrote. "House has energy at night. You get used to it. Also Pugsley sometimes builds things at 2 a.m. Don't go to the east basement." "Right," Harry said. He sat down at the kitchen table. Thing sat across from him, which was anatomically interesting given that it had no chair and no lower body, but managed regardless. "What are you writing?" Thing held up the letter, which contained a paragraph of beautifully precise argumentation about the migration patterns of a specific type of Eastern European moth. Harry read it. "That's really good," he said. Thing made what he was beginning to recognize as a pleased gesture, a sort of modest wave. "Can you teach me?" Harry said. "How to argue like that? In writing?" Thing looked at him for a moment. Then it produced a fresh piece of paper and wrote, in careful letters, I would be delighted. On the second morning, Morticia found Harry in the east hallway looking at the family portraits. Not the ones in the main hall, which were the formal ones, the ones that were meant to represent the family to visitors. The ones in the east hallway were the real ones, smaller, older, painted in a style that suggested the painters had been instructed to get something true rather than something flattering. Harry was stopped in front of a portrait of a young woman. She was dark-haired and slightly austere-looking and holding something in her hands that might have been a book or might have been a small cauldron. The painting's light made it ambiguous. The nameplate below read, Evangeline Addams Evans, 1889–1952. Morticia came to stand beside him. She didn't say anything immediately, which was one of her gifts. She knew when silence was the more generous thing. "She looks a bit like my mum," Harry said finally. He hadn't seen many pictures of his mother. The few he'd been able to access secondhand told him she'd had dark hair. Green eyes. A particular quality in her expression that people who'd known her often described as fierce and warm simultaneously. I don't really know what my mum looked like." "Your mother was a remarkable woman," Morticia said. Her voice was always cool and still, like water at depth, but there was something underneath it now. "From everything I understand of her, and I have been doing some reading, she was gifted beyond most of her peers and deeply, fiercely protective of those she loved." "They say I have her eyes," Harry said. "I know." Morticia looked at the portrait. "You have her stubbornness too, I suspect. You've been here 2 days and you've already learned to lose gracefully and win quietly, which is a specific skill that suggests a certain kind of determination underneath." Harry looked at her. "How can you tell that from 2 days?" "I've been watching," she said simply, without apology. "I watch everyone. It's how I know things." She reached out and touched his shoulder, very lightly, the way she touched things she was being careful with. "We are going to find out everything about your parents that you deserve to know. That is a promise." Harry's throat moved. He looked back at the portrait. "Dumbledore's coming, right?" Wednesday said. "Yes. And Papa, your husband, he's going to fight him." Morticia smiled her still, deep smile. "Gomez will have a conversation with him," she said. "In this family, those are sometimes indistinguishable." He laughed, that same small surprised laugh from the car. She noted it the same way Wednesday had, filed it with care. "Will Dumbledore try to take me back?" Harry asked. The question was quieter than the others, the question underneath all the others. Morticia turned to face him fully. Her eyes were dark and entirely serious. "He will try," she said. "And he will fail. Those 2 things are equally certain." Her hand was still on his shoulder. "This family does not give up what is ours, Harry. Not to anyone. Not for any reason." A pause. "You understand?" He looked at her with those green eyes that were also Evangeline's eyes, also Lily's eyes, eyes that had been waiting a long time for someone to say something like this. "Yeah," he said. "I think I'm starting to." The owl from Gringotts arrived that afternoon with the response to Gomez's letter, and it was, as Gomez had suspected it would be, extremely satisfying. Gringotts confirmed the bloodline documentation. They also confirmed that Harry Potter's inheritance vault, both his parents' personal accounts and the Potter family vault, which was considerably larger, had been accumulating without access or management since his infancy, and that the guardianship designation used to justify the restriction of those funds had been filed under a provision that, upon their review, they found to be procedurally irregular at best and fraudulently executed at worst. Gringotts was not known for inflammatory language. The phrase, fraudulently executed, from Gringotts was the equivalent of anyone else setting something on fire. Gomez read the letter at his desk, set it very carefully on top of the growing pile of documentation, and said to Wednesday, who was sitting in the chair opposite sharpening something, "The goblins are on our side." "Goblins," Wednesday said, "have long memories and very specific ethics about money. Of course they're on our side. You knew they would be." I suggested you contact them first for exactly that reason, she said. Dumbledore's authority in the wizarding world is built on several pillars. Gringotts is one of them. If the goblins are publicly questioning the legitimacy of his guardianship filing, the entire structure wobbles, Gomez finished. He was smiling now, the real one, the one that meant he was at work. Wednesday, have I mentioned lately that you are my particular favorite? You have a particular favorite? Pugsley is my favorite in a different category, Gomez said. I have a complex filing system. He picked up his pen. I need to write to Sirius Black. Wednesday looked up. He's in Azkaban. For now, Gomez said. The charges against him are, upon examination, extraordinarily thin. No trial. No wand test. Testimony from a single unreliable source. He tapped the page. A man who loved Harry's father is rotting in a prison on evidence that wouldn't survive a competent legal challenge, and the competent legal challenge was never mounted because nobody with standing to mount it was paying attention. His pen found the page. I am paying attention now. Outside, the sky above Addams Manor was going dark in the particular way it did here, not a gradual dimming but a theatrical transition, as though the sky took its aesthetic cues from the house. Inside, Lurch was making dinner, and Pugsley was somewhere conducting an experiment that periodically made the walls vibrate, and Thing was probably writing, and Fester was very possibly trying to contact the astral plane again, and somewhere in the east hallway a small boy with green eyes was standing in front of a portrait of his great-great-grandmother and beginning, very slowly, very carefully, to understand that he was not alone. Dumbledore would come tomorrow. The blood feud was declared in the old way, in the right ink, with the right seal, filed in every venue that mattered. The goblins were reading. The ministry had received their documentation. And Gomez Addams sat at his desk in his study with his pen and his coffee and his absolute certainty and wrote a letter to a man in Azkaban who deserved to know that someone had finally come. He signed it with the Addams seal and the warmth of a man who was, in all the best and most terrifying ways, just getting started. Chapter 3, The Headmaster's Gambit. He came at noon. Wednesday knew because the gargoyle on the left parapet turned its head 40 degrees northeast at 11:53, which was what it did when something significant was approaching along the main road. She was in the garden when it happened, practicing with the set of throwing knives Gomez had given her for her birthday, and she paused mid-throw to watch the gargoyle, then completed the throw because interrupting good form for bad news was a habit she refused to develop. The knife hit the center of the target. She retrieved it and went inside. He's coming, she said to Gomez, who was in the entrance hall already, in his best dark suit, which he'd put on that morning with the specific energy of a man dressing for something he'd been looking forward to. I know, Gomez said, adjusting his cuffs. Minerva called ahead. Professional courtesy. He looked pleased. She sounded worried. Not about me specifically. About the situation. That's an important distinction, it means she has doubts of her own. McGonagall has always been more honest than her loyalty to Dumbledore suggests, Wednesday said. She smoothed her dress, unnecessary, it was always smooth, but the gesture steadied her. Who else is coming with him? Minerva and Hagrid. Hagrid is the groundskeeper at Hogwarts, a half-giant, genuinely kind, genuinely devoted to Dumbledore. He won't be a problem. He's not here to fight. He's here because Dumbledore wants a familiar face for Harry. Gomez smiled. Which tells you what Dumbledore thinks this visit is. A retrieval with a friendly face attached. From upstairs, footsteps. Harry appeared at the top of the main staircase in the new clothes Morticia had arranged, dark trousers, a grey shirt that actually fit him, his hair as unruly as ever and apparently immune to any intervention. He looked down at Gomez and Wednesday. Is it now? He said. Nearly, Gomez said. Come down. You should be here. Do I have to talk to them? Only if you want to, Gomez said. Nothing in this house happens to you without your agreement. But, He looked up at Harry with the steady warmth of a man who had once argued 17 consecutive hours in a Muggle courtroom and enjoyed every minute of it. "I think you might want to see this." Harry came down the stairs. Morticia arrived from the corridor, unhurried, wearing deep black with her hair up and her posture its usual perfect architecture. She looked at Harry and put one hand briefly on his shoulder, her version of "It's all right, I'm here," then took her place beside Gomez. Pugsley appeared from a side door eating something that left greenish residue on his fingers. Wednesday gave him a look. He wiped his hands on his trousers. Lurch took his position at the front door. Thing arranged itself on the entry table, upright and attentive, beside the flowers, dark flowers, long-stemmed, a variety that didn't have a common name because it wasn't commonly grown. They were, Wednesday observed with satisfaction, ready. The bell rang once. Lurch opened the door. Albus Dumbledore was taller than Wednesday had expected from the descriptions, and older-looking, with the specific quality of age that suggested it had been earned rather than merely accumulated, deep-lined, silver-haired, half-moon spectacles catching the noon light. He wore robes of deep blue embroidered with silver stars that moved, subtly, if you watched them. His eyes were blue and very bright and carried in them the particular alertness of a man who walked into every room already cataloguing it. Behind him, Minerva McGonagall was sharp-featured and severe in dark green robes, her mouth a compressed line that Wednesday read not as hostility but as controlled concern. Behind her, enormous and bearded and moving with the careful deliberateness of someone very large trying not to take up too much space, was Hagrid, a man the size of a garden shed, with kind eyes visible beneath truly extraordinary facial hair. Dumbledore saw them, Gomez and Morticia and Wednesday and Harry, and his expression did the thing that very controlled faces do when they encounter something they hadn't fully prepared for. It held, but just barely, the smile staying in place while the eyes recalculated rapidly. He'd expected, Wednesday guessed, something stranger. Something he could use as evidence. Instead he got Gomez in a perfect suit and Morticia like something from a pre-Raphaelite painting and a clean, well-dressed, fed Harry standing with his family. "Mr. Addams," Dumbledore said, his voice the warm, measured tone of a man accustomed to every room receiving that voice with gratitude. "Mrs. Addams. Thank you for seeing us." He looked past them to Harry. "And Harry. I'm so glad to see you well." Harry looked at him. Wednesday watched Harry's face, watched him take in this man who was apparently one of the most powerful wizards alive, with his kind eyes and his moving stars and his grandfatherly manner. Watched Harry do his arithmetic. "I don't know you," Harry said. "Not rude. Just accurate." "No," Dumbledore said, and something crossed his face, genuine emotion, she thought, or at least genuine performance of it, and with a man this practiced the difference was nearly imperceptible. "No, we haven't met. I've thought of you often, Harry. I followed your, come in," Gomez said pleasantly. It wasn't an invitation exactly. It was the same tone Wednesday had used at Petunia's door, the tone that framed the next moment as already decided. Dumbledore, who recognized power in its various forms, registered it. He came in. They went to the sitting room. The Addams sitting room was not designed to make guests comfortable in the ordinary way. The chairs were fine but imposing, the light was the good natural light from tall windows, but the art on the walls had a tendency to make the unprepared nervous, and the entire room had an atmosphere of belonging entirely to the people who lived here, which meant guests experienced themselves as guests rather than as people who could set the terms. Gomez sat. Morticia sat beside him. Wednesday took the chair near the window where she could see everyone's faces. Harry sat on the small sofa beside Wednesday, close enough that she could feel the tension in him, not fear, she noted, something more like anger that he was holding carefully. Dumbledore sat across from Gomez. McGonagall sat beside him. Hagrid, who couldn't fit any of the chairs, stood near the door looking deeply uncomfortable, which Wednesday found she didn't mind. "Well," Dumbledore said, and his smile was warm and patient and entirely deliberate. "I think the most constructive thing I can do is simply be direct with you, Mr. Addams, as I suspect you appreciate directness." "Tremendously," Gomez said. His hands were folded in his lap. He was smiling back. The two smiles were superficially similar and entirely different in every quality that mattered. I'm sure you understand, Dumbledore said, that Harry's situation is complicated. His safety has been my primary concern since his parents' deaths. The arrangements I made, difficult as they may have appeared, where do you want to start? Gomez said. Dumbledore paused. I'm sorry. We have several available starting points, Gomez said, in the pleasant tone of a man selecting wine. We could start with the wills, your active suppression of both James and Lily Potter's written instructions regarding Harry's guardianship. We could start with the fraudulent guardianship filing at the Wisengamot, which Gringotts has now described in writing as procedurally irregular. We could start with the 10 years of monitoring that produced no intervention while a child was locked, and I do mean locked, with a padlock, on the outside of a door, in a space 6 feet by 4. His smile didn't waver. Or we could start with Sirius Black, who has been in Azkaban without trial for 10 years on your watch and whose innocence I am increasingly confident of. He tilted his head slightly. You choose. I'm comfortable with any of them. The room was very quiet. McGonagall had gone still in a way that suggested she was controlling a reaction rather than having one. Hagrid looked confused and distressed simultaneously. Dumbledore's smile had undergone a change, it was still present but it had moved from warm to careful. I see you've been thorough, he said. I'm a lawyer, Gomez said. Thoroughness is a professional obligation. I'm also a father, which makes it a personal one. He glanced at Harry, briefly, warmly, and back to Dumbledore. Shall we discuss the wills first, since that seems most fundamental? The wills were sealed, under a provision that requires the welfare of the child to be demonstrably served by the sealing, Gomez said. I have read the provision. 3 times, in fact. The welfare standard was not met by any reasonable metric, which means the sealing was invalid, which means the suppression of the wills was not a legal act. He paused. I assume you knew this. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The bright blue eyes were assessing, recalibrating, the way eyes do when the first approach hasn't worked and a second one is being selected. The situation with Voldemort, he began. Is not, Gomez said, with the first hint of something under the pleasantness, a sufficient reason to override a mother's dying wishes for her son. The word mother landed in the room and stayed there. McGonagall made a small sound. She covered it with a shift in her posture but it was there. Wednesday noted it. Harry, Dumbledore said, turning to the boy with the shift of a man who has decided that the direct adult opponent is currently losing ground and the emotional appeal is the better play. I want you to know that everything I did, every decision, every arrangement, was made to protect you. Your mother's sacrifice created a protection was that my mum's idea? Harry said. The cupboard? Silence. Was it her idea that I live in a cupboard? Harry said. His voice was level and even and not loud at all. Because I've looked at her portrait. And at what Papa found about her. And she seems like someone who would have had a lot to say about a cupboard. Dumbledore opened his mouth. She left a will, Harry said. She wrote down what she wanted for me. You ignored it. So when you say you were protecting me, I think what you mean is you were protecting your plan. He looked at Dumbledore with those green eyes, his mother's eyes, Wednesday thought, fierce and warm and currently neither, and said, with a clarity that belied his age, those aren't the same thing. Hagrid made a sound like a man whose heart had just broken in a specific and irreparable way. McGonagall was looking at Harry with an expression Wednesday had seen on faces before, the expression of someone encountering, for the first time, the full cost of a choice they'd gone along with because they trusted someone else's judgment. It was not a comfortable expression to wear. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in the tone of a man repositioning, "You're perceptive, Harry. You get that from your mother." The warmth was still there, patient and practiced. But you're also 10 years old. The world you've been brought into is dangerous in ways that, is he not safe here? Gomez asked. Is there something threatening him in this house at this moment? No, of course not. Is he well fed? He looks very. Is there a padlock on any door in this house that functions to keep a child inside? Mr. Addams. Dumbledore's voice sharpened slightly, not angry, but no longer performing patience. You are an intelligent man. You understand that there are forces operating in this world, specifically the wizarding world, of which Harry is the center, that require careful management. His protection is not something that can be improvised. I have spent years, yes, Gomez said. You have. He unfolded his hands and leaned forward slightly, and the pleasantness in his voice remained, but something shifted underneath it, something that had always been there but was now no longer bothering to be subtle. You have spent years building a specific outcome. Constructing a specific person. Using a 10-year-old boy as raw material for a plan you developed without his consent, his knowledge, or the consent of the people who loved him and wrote down, in legal documents, what they wanted for him. He paused. I understand the threat. I understand your reasoning. I even understand, to some extent, why a man of your intelligence might convince himself that the ends justify the means. Another pause. But I need you to understand something in return. He let the pause breathe. I don't care about your reasoning, Gomez said pleasantly. Not in this context. What was done to him was wrong. The wrongness doesn't diminish because the motive was large. It doesn't become acceptable because you believed you had no choice. He was a child in a cupboard, and you knew, and you left him there. He sat back. The blood feud stands. I will be in the Wizengamot by the end of this month. I will be in every legal venue both worlds offer. I will take apart every protection you've built around your authority over his life, piece by piece, with complete documentation and considerable enthusiasm. He smiled. And Harry will remain here. Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes were doing their most intelligent work, reading the room, reading Gomez, reading the composition of the family arranged around this man in his own house. Wednesday watched the headmaster and saw something she hadn't expected, not dismissal, not the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. She saw the specific expression of someone encountering an obstacle they hadn't prepared for and who was smart enough to know that unprepared obstacles were the most dangerous kind. I cannot, Dumbledore said carefully, simply accept that Harry is safe here. The blood wards are no longer relevant, Gomez said. Gringotts has confirmed that the ward anchoring has degraded significantly over the past several years, a consequence, we're told, of Harry's relationship with his place of residence becoming less than what the spell requires. A child who does not experience a place as home cannot fuel a home ward indefinitely. He tilted his head. Did you know that? That the wards were weakening? That the conditions you required weren't being met? From McGonagall's face, she hadn't known. From Dumbledore's, he had. We can provide protection here, Gomez continued. Independent protection. This house has its own considerable defenses, which I invite anyone to attempt to breach at their own educational expense. We have resources, connections, and, he paused, almost playfully. Motivation. The wizarding world doesn't know where Harry is, Dumbledore said. There are those who would seek to, then tell them, Wednesday said. Every face in the room turned to her. She met all of them equally. You've spent 10 years hiding him, she said. Building his reputation on a story without a person in it. The wizarding world believes Harry Potter is somewhere safe and loved. You used that belief to maintain your authority over his situation. What you actually had was a boy in a locked cupboard. She paused. Tell them the truth. Tell them where he is. Tell them he's with family. The blood feud is public record, it will be known regardless, because that's how blood feuds work. The only question is whether the truth comes from you, which gives you some control of the narrative, or from us. She looked at Dumbledore with her quiet, surgical gaze. We're not particularly interested in narrative control. Hagrid let out a long, unsteady breath. Dumbledore, he said, and his voice was low and rough. Did you know? About what it was like there? Rubius, did you know? Hagrid's enormous face was twisted with something that was clearly distress and clearly genuine. Because I'm the one who brought him there. I carried him. A baby. I put him on that doorstep and he stopped. Swallowed. I thought he was going somewhere good. He was protected, Dumbledore said, and his voice had acquired the careful quality of a man managing multiple problems simultaneously. He was in a cupboard, Hagrid said. The sitting room was profoundly quiet. Morticia, who had been still and silent through the entire exchange, spoke for the first time. Her voice was its usual quality, cool and deep, with the specific authority of a woman who chose her moments. Hagrid, she said. He looked at her, startled, as though he'd half forgotten she was there. You're welcome here, she said. If you'd like to see Harry, properly see him, speak with him, satisfy yourself that he's well, you're welcome to do that. You needn't go anywhere or be anyone's instrument to do it. You just need to want to. Hagrid looked at her. Looked at Harry. His enormous eyes were very bright and possibly wet. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'd like that. Good, Morticia said. Dumbledore looked at Morticia the way you looked at a piece on a chess board that had just moved somewhere you hadn't planned for. Wednesday observed this with quiet pleasure. This isn't over, Dumbledore said. He'd stood, which indicated he'd decided that this particular engagement was not winnable and the graceful exit was the intelligent choice. He said it without heat, not a threat exactly, more of a statement of fact from a man who was already planning his next approach. Harry's situation is complex in ways that go beyond guardianship law, Mr. Addams. There are things coming that, bring them, Gomez said simply. He'd stood too, because Gomez had the instinct of a duelist and always matched a standing opponent. We're not going anywhere. Neither is Harry. He smiled his particular smile. I look forward to every subsequent conversation. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry, and this time the emotion in the blue eyes was harder to categorize, regret, perhaps, or the particular strain of a man watching a careful design come apart and feeling the loss of it. Take care of yourself, Harry, he said. He will, Wednesday said. We all will. They left. Lurch saw them to the door with the gravity of a man fulfilling a sacred obligation. The door closed. Silence returned to the entrance hall. Pugsley, who had been on the stairs for the last 20 minutes with increasing fidgety energy, said, Can I set something on fire now? I feel like the occasion warrants. No, 3 voices said simultaneously. The East Garden shed, Gomez said, reconsidering. The small one, not the large one. Pugsley's face lit up. He disappeared. Harry hadn't moved from the sitting room doorway. He was leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, looking at the closed front door with an expression that was doing several things at once, processing, and angry, and something else underneath both. Wednesday came to stand beside him. She didn't say anything. He looked at me like I was something he built, Harry said. Yes, she said. Like he was, not sorry, exactly. But like he was annoyed that the thing he built wasn't where he'd left it. That's accurate. He never asked me anything, Harry said. Dumbledore. He told me things. He expressed things. But he never actually asked me anything. What I wanted. What I thought. He paused. You all ask me things. People who see you as a person ask you things, Wednesday said. People who see you as a means to an end tell you things. He was quiet for a moment. Then, McGonagall. She looked, like someone discovering that a decision she lived with had a cost she didn't know about, Wednesday said. Yes. She's more complicated than her loyalty to Dumbledore suggests. That may be useful. He looked at her sideways. You already thought about that. I think about everything. From somewhere outside came the enthusiastic sound of something combusting, followed by Pugsley's whoop of satisfaction. Harry watched the closed door for another moment, then uncrossed his arms and straightened up with the specific quality of someone putting something down, not forgetting it, just deciding where to carry it. What happens now? He said. Papa goes to work, Wednesday said. The legal kind. Gringotts has opened his accounts. You should know that. It means you have access to your parents' funds, which are considerable. We go to Diagon Alley when you're ready. You start learning what you are and what you can do. She paused. And we wait for Dumbledore to make his next move, which he will, because he is not a man who accepts a setback as a conclusion. You're not worried about it? No. She turned to walk back toward the library and paused. Are you? Harry thought about it, genuinely thought, with the same careful honesty he brought to everything. No, he said, sounding slightly surprised. I don't think I am. He looked at his hands for a moment. I think I'm just ready. Wednesday looked at him. Green eyes and borrowed determination and the beginning, she thought, of something that had been waiting all his life for a space large enough to grow in. Good, she said. Stay that way. Later, when the house had settled into its evening rhythms, Lurch in the kitchen, Fester doing something with a telescope on the roof, Thing writing, Pugsley smelling of smoke and satisfaction, Gomez sat in his study and wrote. Not letters this time. Notes, legal briefs, the architectural plans for the Wisingamot case he was going to build, which he was treating with the enthusiasm of a man given a magnificent puzzle. McGonagall had stayed behind, after Dumbledore and Hagrid left, had asked to, actually, which had surprised everyone except Wednesday, and had sat with Gomez for an hour and told him things. Not everything, but enough. Enough about Harry's parents, about the night they died, about what Dumbledore had shared and what he'd kept. About the prophecy in full. Gomez had listened. He'd asked 4 questions, all of them sharp and precise as surgical instruments. He'd thanked her genuinely and she'd left with the look of someone who had done something they couldn't undo and wasn't sure yet if that was relief or exposure. Morticia came into the study at 10 with tea she set on the corner of his desk and a look she gave him that said everything worth saying without using any words. He's sleeping, she said. Harry? Soundly. I checked. Gomez looked up from his notes. How is he? Better than he was, she said. Not yet what he'll be. She sat on the corner of the desk, not in the chair, on the corner, which was a thing she did when they were talking about things that mattered. Dumbledore underestimated us. Most people do, Gomez said. He won't again. No. Gomez picked up his tea. He'll try something else. Something more subtle. He'll work through institutions, through pressure, through the people around Harry rather than coming directly at us again. He'll try to isolate Harry's access to the wizarding world. Control who Harry meets, who he trusts, what he's told before he can be told it by us. He paused. He'll try to make the Addams family into the story, the strange dangerous Muggle relatives who have Harry, which will frighten people who don't know us and give cover to anyone who wants to act against us on his behalf. So we need to be in the wizarding world before he frames the narrative, Morticia said. Diagon Alley first, Gomez said. Let people see him. Let them see us. We are many things but we are not a credible kidnapping story, and Dumbledore knows it, and anyone who actually meets us will know it. He set down the tea and picked up his pen. I also need to write to Sirius Black again. Through the official Azkaban correspondence, which Dumbledore will certainly see, he smiled. Which is fine. I want him to see it. I want him to know that we're pulling that thread. And the Wisingamot? End of the month, Gomez said. I've filed for a hearing. They can't refuse it under blood feud protocols. A declared feud requires adjudication within 30 days, it's written into the old charter that Dumbledore's people are very fond of citing when it suits them. It will be interesting to see how fond of it they are now. Morticia looked at him with her deep, quiet look. You're enjoying this? Enormously, he said, with complete honesty. Is that terrible? No, she said. He hurt family. Her voice was still cool and still, but underneath it was the specific temperature of something that burned cold. Enjoy it thoroughly. Gomez looked at her, and for a moment the legal briefs and the strategy and the careful architecture of the case he was building all receded to background, and what remained was this: Morticia, on the corner of his desk, in the lamplight, absolutely certain. I love you, he said. I know, she said. Win. Cara mia, he said, I intend to. Outside, somewhere beyond the walls and the dead trees and the gargoyle and the thorny garden, the ordinary world moved through its ordinary night. Cars on roads. Lights in windows. People sleeping without knowing that in a house that didn't fit their categories, a family was at work, a father writing, a mother watching, a daughter thinking with a blade nearby, a boy sleeping in a real bed behind a locked door, and that the man who had been the most powerful figure in a hidden world had come to this house expecting to leave with what he came for and had gone home instead with something lodged in his certainty. Not a wound exactly. More like the knowledge that the next move was going to be harder than the last. The gargoyle watched the road. The stars in the library ceiling rearranged themselves. And Gomez Addams wrote through the night with the particular happiness of a man who knows exactly what he's fighting for. Chapter 4, Diagon and Consequences. The morning they went to Diagon Alley, Harry came downstairs to find Gomez at the breakfast table with a copy of the Daily Prophet, a cup of coffee, and an expression of such profound amusement that Wednesday, sitting opposite him with her usual pre-noon nothing, had already looked up twice to check what she was missing. Gomez turned the paper around so Harry could see the front page. The headline read, Boy Who Lived, Where Is He? Below it, a smaller subheading, Ministry sources confirm Harry Potter's whereabouts unknown, Wizarding World asks questions. Below that, a photograph of a question mark that someone had apparently thought was clever enough to print at broadsheet scale. Someone talked, Harry said. Several someones, Gomez said happily. The Gringotts filing is public record. Blood feud declarations are public record. Someone at the ministry with a telephone and a journalist's contact decided that 2 + 2 was an excellent sum to share. He folded the paper. We have approximately 48 hours before someone connects the declaration to an address, and approximately 60 before someone tries to come here in an unofficial capacity. Unofficial meaning journalists, curious witches and wizards, concerned parties of various stripes, and possibly 1 or 2 people who are angry on your behalf and want to express that in person. Gomez stood, buttoned his jacket. Which is why we go today. Before the 48 hours are up and this house becomes a destination. Harry looked at the paper. At the question mark. At the small box in the lower corner that contained a photo of himself as a baby, laughing, round-faced, held by someone whose arm was visible but whose face was cut from the frame. Whose arm is that? He asked. Gomez looked. Something moved through his face. I believe that's your father, he said. Harry looked at it for a long time. Then he put the paper down and ate his breakfast. The journey to Diagon Alley required the leaky cauldron, which required London, which required Lurch driving at a pace that suggested he found traffic guidelines more of a philosophical framework than a legal obligation. Wednesday sat beside Harry in the back and pointed out landmarks with the detached commentary of someone who had walked this city extensively and found it interesting in the way that crypts are interesting, full of history that most people would rather not examine too closely. Gomez rode in the front and made phone calls. 3 of them, in succession, each in a different language, Italian, then something that might have been Aramaic, then what Harry was fairly sure was English but conducted at a speed and density that made it feel like a different language. He hung up the last call as they pulled up to a narrow street near a pub that looked like it was trying not to be noticed. What were those? Harry asked. The Italian was my solicitor in Rome, who has contacts in the International Confederation of Wizards, Gomez said, getting out of the car. The Aramaic was an old friend who handles certain historical records that aren't kept in standard archives. And the third was my cousin Lionel, who knows everyone in both the House of Lords and the Wisingamat and owes me a significant favor from 1987 that we don't discuss at dinner. He held the pub door open with the graciousness of a man holding the door to a five-star restaurant. The leaky cauldron was dim and smelled of wood smoke and something herbal that Harry couldn't identify, full of people in robes who were doing the specific thing people do when they're pretending not to stare, very carefully looking at their drinks while their eyes moved. The barman, Tom, was a small wizened man who registered their entrance with the expression of someone who had seen considerable variety in his years behind this particular bar and was not easily surprised. He was, slightly surprised. Not by Gomez, who moved through the room like he owned it, or Morticia, who moved through it like she was tolerating it, or Wednesday, who moved through it like she was cataloging it for later reference. He was surprised by Harry, or rather, by the combination of Harry and the family around him, which didn't match any version of the story Tom had been carrying in his head for 10 years. Gringotts, Gomez said to the room at large, pleasantly, which made everyone stop pretending not to stare and simply stare. We have an appointment. Don't mind us. The brick wall at the back of the pub garden opened when Gomez tapped it. He'd gotten the sequence from Minerva McGonagall, who had provided it with the air of someone paying a small installment on a larger debt, and Diagon Alley spread itself out before them. Harry stopped walking. He didn't mean to. His feet simply slowed and then stopped because there was too much to take in and his brain, which was efficient and practical, needed an extra moment to process a world that was simultaneously impossible and entirely real. The moving shop signs. The witches and wizards in robes of every color, carrying things that didn't behave like objects should, talking in the familiar shorthand of people for whom none of this was remarkable. A cage of owls outside a shop. A broom hovering in a display window with the casual confidence of something that didn't need to explain itself. A small girl watching a book read itself aloud while she ate an ice cream. Okay, Harry said, very quietly. Yes, Gomez agreed, beside him. It rather is. Can I? Harry started, and then caught himself, and Wednesday noticed the catch, the ingrained habit of asking permission that had been trained into him by years of being told that wanting things was problematic. You can look at anything you like, Gomez said, before Harry could reformulate the question into something smaller and safer. We have time. Gringotts first because the appointment is firm, and then wherever you want. They moved through the alley and the staring began almost immediately. Not the polite pretending not to stare of the leaky cauldron. This was more direct, people stopping, pointing, doing quick double takes at Harry's forehead. The scar was visible, his hair, which had never submitted to any intervention including magical ones, was doing its own thing. He was recognizable in the way that faces carried in a cultural mythology become recognizable even to people who've never seen them before. A woman in purple robes grabbed her companion's arm. Two teenage boys nudged each other. An old wizard with a long white beard actually said, aloud, "Is that Merlin's beard? Is that Harry Potter?" Harry's jaw tightened slightly. Wednesday positioned herself on his left without making a production of it, which meant anyone approaching from that side would encounter her first, which was generally a deterrent. They're staring, Harry said, low. They're surprised, Gomez said, level and easy. For 10 years they've been told you were somewhere safe and happy. Now they can see you with their own eyes. The surprise is natural. It will pass. Don't let it shrink you. Harry straightened slightly. Not performing anything, just adjusting, choosing. Wednesday noted it. Gringotts Bank sat at the far end of Diagon Alley with the authority of a building that had been there longer than everything around it and intended to remain longer than everything that came after. White stone, towering, with goblin guards at the entrance who watched them approach with the assessing calm of people who measured everything in value and found most things lacking. The head of the Potter accounts was a goblin named Sharpclaw, which Wednesday found admirably literal. He was ancient even by goblin standards, with fingers like knotted wood and eyes that contained the specific intelligence of someone who had conducted complicated financial negotiations with every variety of human being for 200 years and was entirely done being impressed by any of them. He was, very slightly, interested in Gomez. "Your documentation," Sharpclaw said, after the formal greetings that goblins conducted at their own pace regardless of any schedule. Gomez produced a leather folder from inside his jacket, where it had fitted with suspicious ease, and set it on the desk. Sharpclaw opened it. He read in silence, which was louder than most people's commentary. His eyes moved down each page with the precision of someone reading in 3 languages simultaneously and checking for errors in all of them. "The consanguinity is documented," Sharpclaw said finally. "4 degrees, maternal line. Legally sufficient under the Old Blood Accords, which Gringotts recognizes independent of the Ministry's current preferences." He looked at Harry directly, which goblins did differently from humans, not into the eyes but at the whole face, as though reading something written there. "You are Harry James Potter." "Yes," Harry said. "You are aware of the contents of your vaults?" "Not really," Harry said. "No one told me anything." Sharpclaw's expression didn't change but something in it sharpened. "No one told you," he said, with the specific flatness of a goblin finding this exactly as outrageous as it was. He turned to a ledger. "Your parents' personal vault contains liquid assets of approximately 900,000 galleons. The Potter family vault," he paused, turned a page. "The Potter family vault contains assets that were last fully audited in 1981. The current estimated value, including interest and property holdings, is considerably more significant." He told them the number. Harry made a sound. "The interest alone," Sharpclaw said, "for the past 10 years, has been compounding at the standard Gringotts rate, because there was no management instruction on file. The guardianship designation that was submitted in 1981 authorized management but never exercised it." The goblin's voice was completely neutral, which made the implication more rather than less damning. "The vaults have simply been sitting." "And the guardianship designation," Gomez said, with the pleasant tone of someone asking about the weather. "The one filed in 1981. Is it on record who filed it?" Sharpclaw looked at him. "It is on record." "And it was filed by?" "The filing was submitted under the authority of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore," Sharpclaw said, acting in his capacity as chief warlock of the Wizengamot. He paused. "It was submitted 4 days after the death of James and Lily Potter. Before the standard probate period. Before the family wills had been formally entered into record." Another pause. "Before Gringotts had been notified of the account holders' deaths through official channels." The silence in the office had a texture. "Before you were notified," Gomez said. "Correct," Sharpclaw said. "Gringotts was not notified through official channels. We became aware through market activity. The Potters' investments, of which there were several, stopped receiving instruction. Standard procedure in such cases is to place them in holding and await contact from the estate." He closed the ledger. "We awaited contact for 10 years. And no contact came," Gomez said. "No contact came from the designated guardian, no," Sharpclaw said. "I should note that we received a query approximately 3 years ago from a party attempting to determine the contents of the Potter vaults, not the guardian, an unnamed third party acting through intermediaries. We declined to provide information, as is standard when the query does not come from a party with documented access." "Who was the third party?" Sharpclaw looked at him with old, patient eyes. "We don't speculate," he said. "We document." He produced a sealed envelope and set it on the desk. "This is our formal statement of the account history and the procedural irregularities, prepared in anticipation of your Wizengamot filing." He looked at Gomez with the expression of a being who had decided, after 200 years, that this particular human was worth a direct statement. Gringotts has its own interests in ensuring that the integrity of estate management is not circumvented by political authority. Your case serves those interests. We will cooperate fully. Gomez received this with the warm seriousness it deserved. "I'm grateful," he said. "Don't be grateful," Sharpclaw said. "Win." Outside the bank, in the white marble air of the steps, Harry stopped and looked at the alley spreading before him, the shops and the people and the impossible ordinary life of a world that had been his all along and that he was seeing for the first time. "I have money," he said. "You have considerably more than money," Gomez said. "You have a name, a history, a family, and now the documented support of the oldest financial institution in the wizarding world." He put a hand briefly on Harry's shoulder. "But if it's useful, yes. You have money." "I've never had money," Harry said. "Aunt Petunia gave me 50 pence once for walking the dog. I bought a Kit Kat and she said I'd wasted it." Wednesday said nothing. Gomez said nothing. The things unsaid were very loud. "Right," Harry said, with the particular decisiveness of someone redirecting himself. "Can we go to the shops?" They went to the shops. The first thing Harry bought was a book. Not a school book, a general magic theory text he'd pulled from a shelf in a second-hand bookshop off the main alley, attracted to it by what Wednesday recognized as intuition, the same instinct that had made him a good chess player in 4 days. He held it under his arm for the rest of the morning with the specific possessiveness of someone who has been allowed to want something and is still getting used to the feeling. The wand shop was called Ollivander's, which was old and dusty and full of boxes and inhabited by a Mr. Ollivander who appeared to have been waiting specifically for today's particular visit, which made Wednesday wonder about wand makers as a category. He measured Harry's arm and hand and the space between his eyes without explaining why, and produced boxes from shelves with increasing focus, and Harry tried several, each producing effects ranging from interesting to alarming, until the 10th wand, 11 inches of holly and phoenix feather, chose him. The shop went warm and still when it happened. Gold sparks from the wand tip, a feeling in the air like something recognizing something. Ollivander's face did something complicated. "Curious," he said, which was apparently his way of saying something significant. "The phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave another feather. Just one other. It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother," he stopped. Looked at Harry carefully. "Well. We shall see what you make of it. What did its brother do?" Harry asked. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. "It gave you that scar," he said. The shop was very quiet. "Okay," Harry said. He looked at the wand in his hand. He didn't put it down. "Okay." He turned it once, slowly, feeling the weight of it. "Then I should probably learn to use it properly." "Yes," Ollivander said, and he was looking at Harry with those pale eyes that saw too much. "You probably should." He paused. "You're different than I expected." Then the story suggested. "What did the story suggest?" Harry asked. "A boy waiting to be found," Ollivander said. "I was," Harry said. "Wednesday found me." He put the wand away. "I'm done waiting." They had lunch at a cafe in Diagon Alley where the chairs moved themselves to accommodate preference and the menu suggested things based on what you actually wanted rather than what you asked for, which Wednesday found presumptuous but efficient. They sat at a corner table and people watched and ate, and 3 separate witches and wizards came to their table, 2 with obvious nervousness and 1 with aggressive certainty, to express opinions about Harry's presence. The first 2 were curious and kind and introduced themselves as people who had known his parents. A woman named Josephine Clearwater who had been in Lily Potter's year at Hogwarts and had to press both hands to her mouth when she saw Harry's eyes. An older man, retired from the ministry, who had worked with James Potter briefly and who shook Harry's hand with an emotion he clearly hadn't prepared for. Harry was careful and genuine with both of them, asking questions about his parents with the focused hunger of someone finally able to eat. Wednesday watched him and felt something she didn't bother to name because naming things made them smaller and whatever this was deserved its actual size. The third visitor was different. A man in expensive robes, self-assured in the manner of someone accustomed to defining the terms of every situation he entered. He stopped at their table and looked at Harry and then at Gomez and then back at Harry with the assessing look of someone doing rapid political calculations. "Lucius Malfoy," Gomez said pleasantly, before the man could speak. He knew the name from his research and Wednesday could see him place it: pureblood aristocracy, ministry connections, a history with Voldemort that was officially described as coerced and unofficially understood as enthusiastic. "Mr. Addams," Malfoy said, with the smoothness of a man who was never underprepared. "I've heard about your involvement with the Potter situation." "Have you?" Gomez said. "The blood feud declaration is quite the dramatic gesture." Malfoy's tone was exactly calibrated, not hostile enough to be rude, not warm enough to be friendly, occupying the political middle where men like him felt safest. "I wonder if you understand the full complexity of, Mr. Malfoy," Gomez said, with the specific warmth of a man who is about to say something devastating in a pleasant voice. "I've reviewed your testimony at your own Death Eater trial. The one you didn't have because you provided the Wisengamot with sufficient gold to avoid it." He smiled. "I understand the full complexity of a great many things. Was there something specific you wanted?" Malfoy's composure held, but not without effort. "I simply wanted to say," he looked at Harry, "that there are people in the wizarding world who have considerable resources, and who have expectations, shall we say, regarding how the Potter heir conducts himself. Expectations about alliances. Associations. A pause. Choices about one's company." Harry looked at him. He'd been listening to the adult exchange with the careful attention he brought to everything, cataloging it, understanding it. Now he looked at Malfoy directly, not with anger, not with performance, just with the quiet evaluation of someone who had been measuring people's intentions from necessity for most of his life. "Is that a threat?" Harry said. "It's a courtesy," Malfoy said smoothly. "Advice, freely given." "Right," Harry said. "My family gives me advice too. The difference is theirs doesn't come with expectations attached." He picked up his fork. "We're eating. Thanks for stopping by." Malfoy's jaw moved. He looked at Gomez, who was wearing the particular expression of a proud parent trying not to show it so as not to embarrass the child, which he was showing anyway. He looked at Wednesday, who was looking back at him with the frank disinterest she reserved for things she'd already fully assessed. He looked at Morticia, who looked at him the way a particularly old glacier might look at a match. He left. Pugsley, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table eating an extraordinary quantity of cauldron cakes, said, "He smelled expensive and scared. It's an interesting combination." "Almost everyone in his position does," Morticia said. The afternoon moved. Harry bought 3 more books and a set of ingredients he'd been told he'd need for potions at a school he hadn't yet been officially enrolled in, though Gomez had begun the paperwork for Hogwarts enrollment through channels that bypassed the standard headmaster's recommendation and went directly to the Board of Governors. Another thread, another pillar of Dumbledore's control being quietly undermined from the base. He also bought an owl. He found her in the Owl Emporium almost immediately, a snowy white owl with amber eyes who regarded him from her perch with the specific focus of someone who had been waiting. He stopped in front of her. She looked at him. "Hello," he said. The owl held out one leg, which wasn't a perch request. It was something else. "She wants to go with you," the shopkeeper said. "She's been turning down every interested buyer for 6 months. Don't take it as a coincidence." Harry looked at her. She looked back with those amber eyes, patient and certain. He reached out slowly and she stepped onto his arm without hesitation, and he stood there with a white owl on his arm in a shop full of owls and looked like someone who had just discovered something he hadn't known he was missing. "What's your name?" he asked her. She clicked her beak once. "Hedwig," Harry said. He didn't know why he said it. It arrived the way some words do, with their own authority. "Is that okay?" The owl made a soft sound that everyone in the shop apparently agreed was affirmative. Wednesday watched this from the doorway and felt the unnamed thing again. She turned away before it became something she'd have to address. It was on the way back through the alley, loaded with books and owl and the particular lightness of an afternoon that had given a person back some of the weight they should always have had, that they encountered Severus Snape. He wasn't browsing. He was standing still in the crowd with the quality of a person who has positioned himself with purpose, dressed entirely in black robes with a face that had the carefully maintained neutrality of someone managing several difficult emotions simultaneously. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was so complicated it folded back on itself: recognition, grief, a hatred that clearly wasn't for Harry, and underneath all of it, guilt, the specific guilt of the person who knows their hands aren't clean. He had his mother's eyes, was the thing. Standing there in Diagon Alley with Hedwig on his arm and books under his other arm and a new wand in his pocket, Harry Potter had Lily Evans's eyes, and the man in black robes couldn't look at them without flinching. Gomez had seen him. He said nothing, but his attention had shifted, the way his attention shifted when he was cataloging something for later. Snape's eyes moved from Harry to Gomez to Wednesday and then, finally, to Morticia, where they stopped for a fraction of a second longer than a stranger's look would warrant. Not attraction, something else. The recognition of a type, perhaps. A person who said exactly what they meant and meant everything they said, and who had made their accounting of this situation and was never going to revise it. Snape turned and walked away. Who was that? Harry said. His name is Severus Snape, Gomez said. He'll be your potions professor when you go to Hogwarts. He was at school with your mother. He paused. He's a complicated man. He looked, Harry tried to find the word. Sad, he settled on. And angry about being sad. That's probably accurate, Wednesday said. Is he a bad person? Gomez considered this. He's a person who made serious mistakes and has been paying for them in a currency that never quite settles the debt, he said. Whether that makes him bad depends on what he does with the guilt. He glanced in the direction Snape had gone. We'll see. The drive back was quieter than the drive there. Harry sat with Hedwig on his knee. The owl apparently had opinions about car seats and had expressed them physically, and looked out the window at the city going past, and his hands were wrapped around the book he'd bought first, the one he'd chosen by instinct, and he turned it over once without opening it. Papa, he said. Gomez, in the front seat, turned slightly. That envelope Sharpclaw gave you, Harry said. The one with all the documentation of the irregularities. You're going to use that at the Wizengamot? Along with everything else, yes. And Dumbledore will be there. He'll have to be. He holds a seat. He can't absent himself from a blood feud adjudication without it being recorded as a formal concession. What does he do when he loses? Harry asked. Not if. When. Wednesday noticed it. Gomez noticed it. That depends on the man, Gomez said. Some people, when they lose something they built carefully, become more dangerous. They stop being predictable. They stop working through institutions and start working around them. He paused. I'm planning for that. How? By making sure that whatever he tries, the record is already clear, Gomez said. The truth about what was done is documented now. Filed with Gringotts, filed with the Ministry, going into the Wizengamot record. It becomes very hard to rewrite a story when it's been written down in so many places simultaneously. He turned back to face the road. Besides. Besides what? He'd have to go through all of us, Gomez said. And we are considerably harder to go through than he's currently accounting for. Harry leaned back in the seat. Hedwig made a small sound and rearranged her wings. Outside, the city gave way to countryside and the afternoon light was going golden and long over the fields. Wednesday, Harry said. That old magic. The blood feud. What happens when it's resolved? Wednesday thought about this properly. It doesn't exactly end, she said. It concludes. The accounting is settled, the record is clear, the debt is acknowledged. But the relationship between the families, the one that the feud created, that's permanent. She looked at him. Blood that has been defended doesn't go back to being abstract. Harry absorbed this. So it means you were already family, Wednesday said, and now that fact has been sworn, documented, defended, and declared to everyone who matters. It means the connection is formal. Real in the way that things are real when they've been tested. She paused. It means you're stuck with us. Harry looked at her. The golden afternoon light was on his face and in his ridiculous hair, and he looked, Wednesday thought, like someone who had been kept in the dark for 10 years and was finding that light suited him considerably. Okay, he said. And then, quietly, with the specific tone of someone who has been practicing not wanting things and has decided, finally, to stop, good. Hedwig clicked her beak approvingly. Back at Addams Manor, before dinner, Gomez went to his study and opened the sealed Gringotts envelope and read through every page. When he finished he sat for a long time with his hands flat on the desk. Then he picked up his pen. He wrote to Sirius Black again, through the official channel, yes, but also through a secondary channel he'd established through Cousin Lionel, who knew a ministry official who had certain obligations. The letter was direct and specific and included, for the first time, not just legal information but the line, "Your godson is safe, well-fed, sleeping in a room with a door that locks from inside, and today bought his first owl. Her name is Hedwig. He named her himself. He is ready to know who you are. We are working on getting you out. Hold on." He sealed it. He gave it to Thing, who took it with the gravity of someone entrusted with something important. Then he opened his brief for the Wisingamot and began writing the case in full. Outside his window, in the last light of the afternoon, Harry was in the garden with Hedwig on his arm practicing what Gomez recognized, from the description Wednesday had given him after their first morning, as accidental magic, except that it wasn't accidental. It was deliberate and focused and remarkable for a child of 10 with no formal training. He was making things move with his mind. Not slightly. Not with effort. With the particular ease of someone who has always been able to do something and is finally, for the first time, in a place where doing it is allowed. Gomez watched him through the window for a long moment. Then he looked back at his brief and wrote, at the top of the first page, in his best ink, in the matter of Harry James Potter, and what was owed him, and by whom, and what the reckoning requires. He underlined it once. He began. Chapter 5, The Hunt Reversed. The owl arrived at 6 in the morning, 3 days after Diagon Alley. It was not a friendly owl. It was ministry grey, the kind bred specifically for official correspondence, no personality, no warmth, purely functional in the way of things designed by committees. It landed on the study windowsill with the officious energy of a summons server and held out its leg with institutional indifference. Gomez was already at his desk. He'd slept 4 hours, which was normal for him during cases he cared about. He untied the letter, read it, and smiled. It was from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Specifically from its head, a woman named Amelia Bones, who had apparently been doing her own reading since the Blood Feud declaration went public, and who wrote with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly what they were saying and wanted it on record that they'd said it. The letter informed Gomez that the department had opened a preliminary inquiry into the guardianship filing of 1981, the circumstances of Harry Potter's placement, and the status of the case against Sirius Black, which had, she noted, never been formally closed despite the conviction. At the bottom, in slightly different handwriting than the formal body of the letter, marginally less official, marginally more human, she had added, "The irregularities you have documented are significant. I want you to know they are being taken seriously by this office, regardless of other pressures." Gomez read that last part twice. Then he wrote Amelia Bones a return letter that was warm, thorough, and included 40 pages of additional documentation that Thing had helped him organize the previous night. He was sealing it when Wednesday appeared in the doorway with her hair still in its braids from sleep, wearing her black robe, carrying 2 cups of tea in a way that suggested she'd made them as a practical exercise rather than as any kind of morning sentiment. She set one on his desk and sat. The ministry owl woke me, she said. Amelia Bones, Gomez said, and told her. Wednesday held her cup and thought. She's independent, she said. Bones has a reputation for being genuinely independent of Dumbledore's influence. She runs the DMLE on its own terms. She's been uncomfortable about the Black case for years. There's a paper trail of internal memos asking questions about the trial, or rather the absence of it, that never went anywhere because nobody senior wanted to push. Until now, Gomez said. Until now, she agreed. Because now there's external documentation and a blood feud and a public record. She can move because someone else moved first. She looked at him. Dumbledore will know about her letter by noon. Yes, Gomez said. He'll try to manage her. He'll call it a delicate situation, a matter of broader considerations, the usual language he uses to make institutional interference sound like wisdom. He picked up his pen. We need to be faster than his management. This was what the next week looked like, from the inside, a chess game played across two worlds simultaneously, with pieces that moved through courtrooms and newspapers and private dining rooms and the specific social architecture of pure-blood wizarding society, which turned out to have its own complex opinions about the Harry Potter situation now that the Harry Potter situation had opinions of its own. Morticia handled the pure-blood society. This had been her idea, and it was the quietest and most effective campaign of all of them. She went to tea with 3 families in the first week. Not the Malfoys. The others, families who had Dumbledore's ear through tradition rather than ideology, who had supported him because he was the established authority and they understood established authority, but who had their own views about blood law and family rights and the impropriety of overriding a mother's dying wishes. Old families with long memories and a specific sense of propriety that Dumbledore had never thought to protect because he'd never imagined it turning against him. She came home from each visit in her usual unhurried way, set down her bag, and told Gomez what she'd found in the careful, complete manner she had with information. By the end of the third tea, 2 of the 3 families had quietly indicated they would not be supporting Dumbledore's position at the Wisengamot hearing. The third was considering. What did you tell them? Gomez asked. The truth, Morticia said, removing her gloves. That a woman wrote down what she wanted for her son. That a man with significant authority decided he knew better. That the son spent 10 years in a cupboard while that man was celebrated for his wisdom. She paused. I didn't need rhetoric. The facts were sufficient. Cara mia, Gomez said, you are magnificent. I know, she said, and went to check on Harry. Harry, meanwhile, was learning. This was not the carefully managed curriculum of someone being prepared for a specific purpose. This was the unstructured, voracious, sometimes alarming learning of a child who had been kept away from information for 10 years and was now surrounded by the largest private library in southern England, a former something fester whose relationship with obscure magical theory was extensive and entirely unacademic, and Wednesday, who approached teaching the way she approached everything, directly, thoroughly, and without the softening that most educators applied to keep students comfortable. She started with theory because theory was the skeleton on which everything else hung. Magic was not mysterious, she told him. It was systematic. It had rules. The rules were complicated and sometimes contradictory, and occasionally the rules were wrong, but they were knowable, and knowing them was more useful than feeling them. Harry sat across from her at the library table with a notebook, actual notebook, spiral-bound. He'd asked for it specifically over parchment because he thought in lines not scrolls, and took notes that were dense and margined and covered in small diagrams that weren't in any textbook because he made them himself to understand the thing he was being told. He learned magical theory in the morning. In the afternoons, when his brain needed to move instead of sit, he practiced in the garden. His control was extraordinary for someone untrained. Not perfect, he overshot things regularly, and his first attempt at a levitation exercise sent Pugsley's least favorite experiment table over the garden wall and into the road, which required Lurch to retrieve it and Gomez to perform a memory charm on a passing cyclist, but the power behind it was unmistakable. He had range and instinct and a quality that Wednesday, watching him, identified as presence. When he was doing magic, the air around him noticed. "You're not accessing it the standard way," she told him one afternoon, after he'd moved a stone the size of a small car without appearing to break concentration. He looked up. "What's the standard way?" "Wand work is about directing a specific channel. You're not directing, you're projecting. The magic moves from you outward." She tilted her head. "It's more like what very powerful wizards do after years of practice. You're doing it at 10. Is that a problem?" "It's information," she said. "It means you need to learn direction. Power without direction is significant, but limited. You want both." He nodded and picked up his wand. "Show me." She did. She wasn't trained in wand magic specifically. The Addams' relationship with magic was its own category, older and weirder and not particularly concerned with the wizarding world's formal systems, but she'd read enough to demonstrate the principles. She moved through 3 exercises with the precision she brought to all physical things, clean and complete. He watched once. Then he tried it himself and got it exactly right on the second attempt. Wednesday set her wand down. "Stop that," she said. "Stop what?" "Being immediately good at things. It makes the teaching redundant, and then what do I do with my time?" He grinned at her, a real one, the kind that used his whole face, that she was seeing more of now. She turned away and picked up her book. "Again," she said. "Cleaner." The Daily Prophet ran its second story about Harry on day 4. This one had a photograph, obtained from somewhere, by someone, through means Wednesday intended to trace, of Harry and Gomez outside Gringotts. The headline was, "Potter heir with mysterious family, who are the Addams?" The story was mostly questions and speculation, with a sidebar that included the phrase dark arts practitioners in a context that was carefully not quite an accusation. Harry read it at the breakfast table and his jaw went tight. "Dark arts practitioners," he said. "We prefer enthusiasts of the broader magical tradition," Gomez said, not looking up from his coffee. "It's trying to make you sound dangerous." "To me. It's trying to make us sound like a reason to remove you from our care," Wednesday said. "Which means someone fed that angle to the journalist. The description of us isn't accurate, but it's specifically calibrated, dark arts, mysterious, unknown. It's the vocabulary Dumbledore's people use when they're building a narrative." Harry put the paper down. "Can we do something about it?" "We already did," Gomez said. He produced, from beside his coffee cup, a different paper, not the Prophet, a smaller publication with a different masthead, the Quibbler, which was technically a tabloid but which had a policy of printing things the Prophet wouldn't, and an editor named Xenophilius Lovegood who was peculiar in ways that Gomez found professionally useful. "I gave an interview yesterday afternoon. It runs today." Harry picked it up. The headline read, "Exclusive, the truth about Harry Potter and the family that found him." The subheading, Gomez Addams speaks on blood feud, Gringotts documentation, and what a cupboard lock means about 10 years of official silence. Harry read it. He read it carefully, the way he read everything, and his expression moved through several things. When he finished, he set it down. "You told them everything," he said. "Everything that's documented," Gomez said. "Nothing speculative, nothing I can't back up with a paper trail. The facts, clearly stated, without editorializing, because the facts are damning enough on their own and editorializing lets people dismiss them as emotion." He paused. "The Prophet will respond. They'll call it attention-seeking or legally dubious or politically motivated. That's fine. The record exists. People who want the truth know where to find it." "Dumbledore will be furious," Harry said. "Dumbledore," Gomez said, "will be managing. He's not a furious man, he's a managing man. He'll be calculating the damage and determining his next move." He picked up his coffee. "Let him calculate. We'll have moved again by the time he finishes." The move came from an unexpected direction. Not Dumbledore directly. Through a man named Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, who arrived at Addams Manor on day 6 with 2 ministry officials and the specific energy of a man who had been pushed into doing something he wasn't certain about but was going to do with authority regardless. He was pink-faced and bowler-hatted and carried in his bearing the fundamental anxiety of a politician who has realized that a situation has become larger than his management capacity and is hoping that a display of authority will compensate for the absence of genuine control. Wednesday answered the door. She looked at him. He looked at her and then reflexively upward at the house and then back at her. "I need to speak with Mr. Addams," he said. "Regarding the matter of Harry Potter and the situation." "What specifically about the situation?" Wednesday said. The declaration, and he straightened. "This is a ministry matter, young lady. Is your father available?" "I'll check," Wednesday said, and left him on the doorstep for 45 seconds, not long enough to be rude, exactly long enough to establish who this visit was happening on whose terms, before Gomez appeared behind her with his jacket on and his warmth fully deployed. "Minister," Gomez said, as though Fudge were an expected and welcome guest. "Please come in." They went to the formal sitting room, which was different from the family sitting room, more deliberately arranged, the furniture positioned for the kind of conversation where someone needs to feel they're being received rather than assessed. Gomez had specific rooms for specific things. This room said, "I take you seriously enough to give you the formal setting you were expecting." Fudge sat. His 2 officials remained standing, which gave them the look of supporting props rather than participants. "Mr. Addams," Fudge said, once he'd arranged himself, "I want to be reasonable about this." "Wonderful," Gomez said. "I also want to be reasonable. We're aligned. The blood feud declaration is, legally speaking, valid. I'll grant you that. The old charters do allow it. But the practical implications are that a wronged family has the right to seek adjudication," Gomez said. "Which is what we're doing. Through the Wisengamot, as the charter specifies. It's entirely procedurally correct. The Dumbledore matter is," Fudge shifted. "Albus Dumbledore is an important figure. His role in the wizarding world is not diminished by legal accountability," Gomez said pleasantly. "In fact, if his position is as significant as you're suggesting, then the integrity of the accounting process matters more, not less. We wouldn't want the impression that important figures exist outside the legal frameworks that govern everyone else." Fudge's mouth worked. He had not come prepared for this. He'd prepared for an eccentric, possibly aggressive muggle who needed to be managed with the appropriate combination of authority and flattery. He had not prepared for Gomez Addams, who was meeting his authority with more of the same and his flattery with precise counterargument delivered in a tone of perfect congeniality. "The boy," Fudge said, pivoting. "Harry's situation, is the ministry wants to ensure, Harry," said Harry, from the doorway. Everyone looked. He was standing in the doorway of the sitting room in his dark trousers and grey shirt with his arms crossed and Hedwig on his shoulder. The owl had apparently decided that his shoulder was the correct place to be during important conversations, and he was looking at Fudge with that quiet, evaluating look. "My name is Harry," he said. "Not the boy." He came into the room and sat on the arm of Gomez's chair. Not in front of him. Beside him. "You can ask me directly if you want to know about my situation." Fudge looked at him with the discomfort of a man encountering a child behaving in a way that doesn't match his model of children. He said, with the strained warmth of obligatory kindness, "Are you, Harry? Are you being looked after?" "Yes," Harry said. "And you're here of your own, Voldemort killed my parents," Harry said. Fudge flinched at the name. Harry watched him flinch. "Dumbledore put me with my aunt's family instead of following my parents' wills. I was 10 years old and nobody had told me anything about the wizarding world or who I was or what my parents wanted for me. Wednesday found me. She brought me here. These are the facts." He paused. "Do you have a question about any of those facts?" Fudge's mouth opened and closed. One of his officials had produced a notebook and then thought better of writing anything down. The ministry's position, Fudge said, rallying, is that Dumbledore's decisions were made in good faith, Wednesday said from her chair near the window, where she positioned herself when Harry came in, is not a defense against outcome. The outcome is documented. We're happy to share the documentation with the ministry. She paused. We already have, actually. In the filing from last week. Has anyone in your office read it? We're reviewing, it's 43 pages, she said. It took me 40 minutes. The pertinent sections are highlighted. The sitting room was the specific quiet of a conversation where one side has all the leverage and the other side is beginning to understand that. Fudge looked at Gomez with the expression of a man making a last assessment before deciding on a retreat. You understand, he said, lowering his voice slightly, that there are elements of Harry's situation that go beyond, that the prophecy, and I understand completely, Gomez said. I also understand that prophecies are not parental consent, and that the existence of a threat does not authorize the deliberate neglect of a child. He leaned forward slightly. Minister. I want to be direct with you because I think you're a man who appreciates directness when it's delivered correctly. Fudge straightened slightly at the implied compliment. People always did. I am not your enemy, Gomez said. I am not attempting to destabilize your ministry or undermine your authority. I am a man whose family was wronged, pursuing legal remedy through proper channels. If the ministry positions itself against that process, it will look, to anyone paying attention, like the ministry is protecting a man who put a child in a cupboard from the legal consequences of having done so. He sat back. I don't think that's a position you want. I don't think it reflects your personal values. And I think you're smart enough to know that the story has already been written in enough places that silence from the ministry at this point becomes its own kind of statement. Fudge looked at him for a long moment. You could see him doing the calculation, the political one, the one that weighed Dumbledore's considerable influence against the emerging public record, against Gringotts, against Amelia Bones, against the number of people who had now read the Quibbler interview and the Blood Feud filing. He stood. We'll be reviewing the matter, he said. I'm not in a position to make commitments at this, of course, Gomez said warmly, standing. Take your time. The Wisengamot date is set, so the timeline is fixed, but within that we're entirely patient. He extended his hand. Fudge, somewhat helplessly, shook it. Wednesday walked them to the door. She watched the ministry car pull away, black and official and somehow less imposing than it had been when it arrived. Fester appeared from the corridor, eating crackers, wearing a sweater with a picture of a skull on it that said Happy Tuesday even though it was Thursday. How'd it go? Fudge is going to wait and see which way the wind blows, she said. Which means he won't actively oppose us. He won't actively support us either. He'll be absent from the Wisengamot vote in a way that he can justify to both sides. That's good for us. It's sufficient, she said. We don't need him. We need the votes, and the votes are coming from the families Morticia spoke with and from Bones and from the documentation. She paused. We need one more thing. What? Sirius Black, she said. We need him out of Azkaban before the hearing. The letter that came back through Cousin Lionel's channel 3 days later was in handwriting that had clearly been composed with the effort of someone whose hands had been cold for a very long time. The letters were uneven, the pressure on the paper varying as though the writer wasn't sure how hard to press. But the words were clear and the intelligence in them was undimmed. Mr. Addams, I don't know how you found me or how you know what you know, but I am choosing to believe the part about Harry because the alternative is that this is another ministry trick and I've had enough of those to last several lifetimes. James and Lily would not have wanted this. I want you to know I know that, every single day in here. I was supposed to be his godfather. I was supposed to be there. If you can do what you say you can do, if there's actually a way out that's real and legal and doesn't require me to spend another decade rotting, then yes. I'm listening. I'm here. I've been here. Tell Harry, Tell him his father would have loved this. The Addams family. James would have lost his entire mind with joy. S.B. Gomez read it at his desk and was quiet for a moment. Then he called cousin Lionel and told him to start the writ of habeas corpus, magical equivalent, old charter provision, last used in 1923 but entirely valid, and to find out which Wisengamot members sat on the criminal review panel. He was still on the phone when Harry appeared in the study doorway. "I heard you talking to Lionel," Harry said. "Is it about Sirius?" Gomez finished his sentence to Lionel, held up one finger, and wrapped up the call. He turned to Harry. "He wrote back," he said. "He's willing." "Can I?" Harry started. He stopped. Started again. "Can I write to him?" "Yes," Gomez said. He produced a sheet of clean parchment and moved it to the end of the desk nearest Harry, beside the ink. "Take your time." Harry sat at the end of the desk. He picked up the pen, Gomez's good pen, and Gomez noticed and said nothing, and held it over the paper for a long moment. Then he wrote. Gomez found something important to review on the other side of the room. Wednesday arrived at the study at 9:30 with the updated brief for the Wisengamot hearing, which she'd been editing all afternoon with the focus she applied to things she'd decided mattered. She was reaching the point in the preparation where the documents had real shape, where the argument had internal logic and structural momentum. She spread it on the desk beside Gomez's papers and they went through it together, the way they worked best, him proposing, her identifying weaknesses, both of them finding the place where the argument was strongest and building from there. Outside, the garden was dark and the gargoyle was doing its perimeter watch, and somewhere upstairs Harry was sleeping with Hedwig on the bedpost and a letter to his godfather sealed and ready to send in the morning. The argument about the blood ward degradation, Wednesday said. You need a second source. Sharpclaw's statement is solid but Dumbledore will argue Gringotts has commercial interests. I have a statement from an independent cursebreaker, Gomez said. From Cairo. She consulted remotely on the ward analysis and her conclusions matched Sharpclaw's. Name. Alessandra Voss. She's Muggle-born, which matters because it removes any pureblood politics from the credibility argument. Wednesday made a note. The wills. Do we have the originals or copies? Gringotts had the originals filed in the estate vault. We have certified copies. Gomez tapped the relevant page. The wills are the cleanest part of the case. James and Lily both explicitly excluded Petunia Dursley as guardian. Both wills named Sirius Black as primary guardian, Remus Lupin as secondary, Frank and Alice Longbottom as tertiary. They were incapacitated, which would have triggered the secondary, which was never activated. He shook his head. There was a path. A clear path. Someone had to actively navigate around it. Dumbledore's going to say he believed Sirius was the spy, Wednesday said. That's his defense for the Black situation. That he had reason to believe Sirius was guilty. Which is why we need the wand analysis, Gomez said. The documented spells attributed to Sirius that night don't match the wand work. The street explosion was, according to 3 forensic magical analyses that were apparently conducted and then filed rather than acted on, not Sirius's spell. Wednesday was quiet. Someone else cast it, Gomez said. And Sirius, who was there, who everyone saw at the scene, who was laughing in a way that looked like madness but was probably shock, Sirius took the sentence without a trial because nobody withstanding offered him one. And nobody offered him one because Dumbledore controlled the information. He set down his pen. Not framing him. I don't think Dumbledore framed him deliberately. I think he assumed guilt and moved fast and sealed the information and then had too much invested in the assumption to revisit it. The road to a prison sentence, Wednesday said, being paved with convenient certainties. Exactly. She made 3 more notes and closed the brief. It was ready. In 2 days, Gomez would stand in the Wisengamot chamber with this brief and 43 pages of documentation and the Gringotts statement and the wills and the ward analysis, and he would take the argument apart and rebuild it in front of everyone who mattered. Wednesday had read enough of his previous legal work to know what that looked like. She was looking forward to it. "There's one more thing," she said. Gomez waited. "Dumbledore is going to try something before the hearing," she said. "He hasn't moved in 5 days, which is not because he's been idle. He's been building something. The quiet before he makes his next play is getting long." She paused. "I think he's going to go after Harry's schooling. Try to block the Hogwarts enrollment, or control the terms of it, or make attending Hogwarts conditional on something that puts Harry back in his orbit." "The Board of Governors filing," Gomez said. "He's chief warlock and he knows people on the board. He can't stop the enrollment, the direct application provision is valid, but he can create conditions around it. Suggest that Harry requires special supervision. Frame it as concern for his welfare." She paused. "It would let him argue that Harry needs a specific kind of management that only Hogwarts, under his authority, can provide. And the Ministry, if Fudge is nervous enough, might support it," Gomez said. "Maybe." She looked at him. "We need to move first." "How?" "Harry needs to demonstrate competence," she said. "Publicly, formally. Not just power, structure and control. If we can show that he's been receiving proper magical education here, with documentation, then the welfare argument collapses. He doesn't need Dumbledore's special supervision because he's already being supervised by people who are producing results." Gomez looked at her. The study was quiet and lamplit and the brief was closed on the desk between them. "You want to give him an evaluation?" "I want him to sit the standard wizarding competency assessment for his age," she said. "Privately administered, witnessed by a qualified examiner who isn't affiliated with Hogwarts. If he passes, and he will, he's already significantly beyond his age level, we document it and file it with the board before Dumbledore can make his argument." "Who administers it?" "I've already contacted someone," she said. "An examiner from the Newt and OWL board. Independent, retired from formal practice, no ties to Dumbledore. She can come Thursday." Gomez looked at her for a long moment. "You started arranging this before you told me." "I started thinking about it," she said. "I waited until I was sure before telling you." He picked up his coffee. "When did you become a tactician?" "I always was," she said. "I just had simpler targets before." She got up and moved toward the door. "Wednesday," Gomez said. She stopped. "Whatever happens at the hearing," he said, "whatever Dumbledore does or doesn't do, whatever the Wisengamot decides, Harry is ours. That doesn't change. I want you to know that's not contingent on winning." She looked back at him. The lamp was behind him and his face was in partial shadow and he looked exactly like himself, exactly like her father, exactly like the man who had always moved toward things that needed moving toward. "I know," she said. "But we're going to win anyway." She went upstairs. She passed Harry's room. Under the door, a narrow line of candlelight. He was still awake. She stopped, considered knocking, decided against it, then heard something that made her stop entirely. He was reading aloud. Softly, to himself or to Hedwig or to no one, reading from one of his library books, working through a complicated paragraph on the theory of intent in spellcasting, pausing at words he didn't know, murmuring them to himself, moving on. His voice was quiet and unperformed, the voice people have when they think no one is listening, and it was the voice, she thought, of someone who was actually happy. Not performed happy. Not grateful for scraps happy. Actually, quietly, specifically happy in the way of someone who has found the place they belong and is still getting used to the fact that it doesn't have a cost. She went to her own room. She sat at her desk and opened her journal, the black one, the one she wrote in rather than the one she used for research, and wrote one sentence: "He is going to be extraordinary." She looked at it for a moment. Then she wrote a second sentence: "He already is." She closed the journal. She looked at the wall where a map of the Wisengamot chamber was pinned, marked with names and anticipated positions and the specific geographic logic of a room where power arranged itself in predictable patterns that could be read and used. 2 days to the hearing. Sirius Black's writ, moving through channels. Amelia Bones, reading documentation. 3 pureblood families, holding their position. A retired examiner, coming Thursday to watch Harry do what he'd been doing all week in the garden with no audience. And Dumbledore, quiet for 5 days, building something. Wednesday looked at the map. She was not afraid. She had never been afraid of anything that could be outthought, and she had not yet encountered anything that couldn't. She went to sleep. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. The examiner arrived Thursday morning in a taxi that she'd clearly found confusing, wearing the particular expression of a woman who had been retired for 6 years and had mixed feelings about unretiring. Her name was Emmeline Voss, no relation to the cursebreaker, she'd clarified in her confirmation letter, which suggested the question had come up before, and she was 73 years old, small, and sharp in the way of people whose sharpness had never been blunted by anyone's attempt to manage it. She looked at Addams Manor from the front path and said, "Well, that's a house." "Yes," Wednesday said, who had answered the door. "And you're the girl who arranged this?" "Yes." Emmeline looked at her with the frank assessment of someone who had spent 40 years evaluating magical ability and knew what she was looking at in people as well as in spells. "Right," she said. "Where's the boy?" Harry was in the garden with Gomez, who had been doing something Wednesday recognized as deliberate preparation without calling it preparation, walking through the theory of one exercise with Harry while appearing simply to be having a conversation, his hands in his jacket pockets, his manner entirely casual. Harry was listening with the specific quality he had when he was absorbing rather than performing, his head slightly tilted, Hedwig on his shoulder because Hedwig had become his constant during things that mattered. Emmeline watched them from the garden door for a moment before Gomez noticed her and they came over. She shook Gomez's hand with the briskness of someone conducting business and looked at Harry with the direct, appraising gaze of her profession. "Harry Potter," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm going to ask you to do some things today. Not perform, do. There's a difference. Performance is for an audience. What I want to see is what you actually know and what you actually can." She tilted her head. "Do you understand the distinction?" "Yes," he said. "I think so." "Good. Then let's get started." Wednesday sat on the garden wall with her book and watched. What followed was 3 hours that she would think about afterward in the specific way you think about things you knew were significant while they were happening. Emmeline worked through every competency level for a child Harry's age and then, because Harry cleared each level inside 5 minutes, moved through the next 2 years and then the one after that. She asked him to cast, to analyze, to explain his reasoning, to deconstruct what he'd done and reconstruct it differently. She gave him problems that had no standard solution and watched what he did in the space between knowing the answer and finding it. He was, as Wednesday had known he would be, extraordinary. Not in a way that announced itself. That was the specific quality she'd identified early and now found confirmed. He didn't reach for power when precision would do. He didn't show off when showing clearly was sufficient. He made mistakes, a misdirected spell on the 4th exercise, a miscalculation in a theoretical problem, acknowledged them without drama, and adjusted. He didn't perform confidence and he didn't perform uncertainty. He simply did the work. Emmeline took notes throughout. At the end of the 3rd hour, she stood in the middle of the garden with her notes and a pen and was quiet for a moment. "I've examined approximately 400 students in 40 years, she said. In various settings, various ages, various levels of prior training." She looked at Harry. "You have had 6 weeks of structured tutelage and approximately 10 years of accidental practice. Your theoretical knowledge is at 3rd-year standard, your practical application is beyond that in several areas, and your instinctual magic," she paused. "Your instinctual magic is something I've seen in perhaps a dozen students in my entire career, and those students are all people you'd recognize if I named them." Harry looked at her. Is that good?" That is exceptional, Emmeline said, without warmth or flattery, in the voice of a woman reporting a finding. I want to be clear that exceptional is not easy. It brings complications and responsibilities and a target. She looked at him steadily. But it is what it is, and you deserve to know it accurately. She turned to Gomez. I'll have the written assessment to you by tomorrow morning. Certified, witnessed, filed with the standard registry. I'm grateful, Gomez said. Don't be, she said, which was apparently the professional standard in the wizarding world for closing a compliment. The boy's good. That's its own justification. She looked at Wednesday. Well done. Wednesday inclined her head. After Emmeline left, Harry stood in the garden with his hands in his pockets and the particular stillness of someone processing a large piece of information. Gomez was on his phone. Hedwig was doing something in the tree. Wednesday came off the wall and stood beside him. How do you feel? Like someone told me something true, Harry said. About myself. That I didn't know. He paused. I always thought the strange things were accidents. Or problems. Things I was doing wrong. You were doing them without understanding, she said. That's different from wrong. He looked at her. Wednesday. Dumbledore thought the cupboard would make me humble, he said. Like being kept small would keep me from being arrogant about, whatever this is. He gestured at himself, at the garden, at the residual magic in the air that Emmeline had been measuring all morning. But I don't think power makes people arrogant. I think not understanding it does. Wednesday was quiet for a moment. Say that again, she said. What? What you just said. Say it again, differently. He thought about it. People who don't know what they have are afraid of it, he said slowly. Or, they're afraid other people will be afraid of it. So they either hide it or they overcorrect and make it louder than it needs to be. He looked at his hands. I just want to know what it is. And use it for things that matter. Wednesday looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. Exactly that. The Quibbler ran their second piece the following morning. This one had photographs, the Diagon Alley photographs, Harry and Gomez on the Gringotts steps, Harry with Hedwig, the family at the entrance to the alley with the specific composition of people who are together by genuine choice. Underneath, Gomez's documentation excerpts, summarized clearly. Amelia Bones's inquiry announcement, which she'd released through official channels. The Blood Feud declaration, reproduced in full. And on the second page, between a piece about conspiracy theories involving the ministry canteen and an advertisement for dragon scale boots, a brief, unsigned editorial that Wednesday suspected was Lovegood himself, which said simply, for 10 years we were told the boy was safe. We now know that was not true. The question is not how this happened. The question is who knew and said nothing. The records exist. The Wisengamot meets tomorrow. Pay attention. The Prophet ran a counterpiece the same morning. Unnamed sources questioning the Addams family's motives. Suggestions that the blood connection was tenuous and legally dubious. A quote from a ministry spokesperson, not Fudge, a lower official. Fudge was still waiting for the wind, that expressed the ministry's confidence in the established institutional frameworks. A photograph of Dumbledore from an event 3 years ago, surrounded by people he'd helped, smiling, looking exactly like the most reasonable man in the world. Harry read both papers at breakfast. He set them down side by side and looked at the two photographs, Dumbledore and himself on the Gringotts steps. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, Gomez confirmed. Am I coming? Yes, Gomez said. You're the center of the case. You don't have to speak unless you want to. But you should be there. You should be seen. I want to speak, Harry said. Gomez looked at him. Are you sure? They've been talking about me for 10 years, Harry said, with the quiet certainty of someone who has thought this through. Without me. I think it's time I was there for the conversation. Gomez was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes. I think so too." Wednesday watched her father look at Harry and saw something she didn't have a word for exactly but recognized nonetheless. It was the look he gave things he was proud of without needing them to know it, the look he gave the best moments without announcing that they were the best moments. "All right," Gomez said. "Then tonight, we prepare." The Wisingamot chamber was in the Ministry of Magic, accessible through the telephone box entrance in London that took you down an elevator into the specific bureaucratic underworld of a government that had been operating on the same basic model since the 14th century and had added to it incrementally ever since, which meant the architecture was complicated and the lighting was worse than it needed to be and the whole thing had the atmosphere of somewhere important trying not to look too impressed with itself. They arrived early. Gomez in his best suit, Morticia beside him, Wednesday on his other side, Harry between Wednesday and Morticia, the formation, she noted, of people who were not performing unity but simply were it. Fester had stayed home. Not because he'd been asked to, because he'd decided, with surprising perceptiveness, that the Wisingamot chamber was one of those situations that benefited from a specific kind of restraint, and that his particular skill set was not the restraint currently required. He'd given Harry a brief, powerful hug on the doorstep, told him something in his ear that made Harry laugh, and then gone back inside. Pugsley had shaken Harry's hand with the seriousness of someone sending someone to war, which was Pugsley's highest register of earnestness. Lurch had driven them in absolute professional silence and parked outside the building with the gravity of a man who understood weight. The chamber was full when they entered. Not the public gallery, the working chamber, the tiered seating where the Wisingamot members sat in their plum-colored robes, the space that smelled of old stone and old power and the particular mustiness of institutions that had been making decisions for a very long time. Several faces turned when they entered. Several more turned after those, the ripple effect of notable arrivals. Harry walked in without flinching. That was the thing Wednesday noticed first and kept coming back to all morning. He walked in without flinching. Past the stairs, past the murmurs, past the weight of 200 witches and wizards looking at the scar on his forehead and doing their own calculations. He walked with his hands loose at his sides and his chin level and the specific quality she'd been watching develop over 6 weeks, not arrogance, not performance, just presence. The presence of someone who has decided they are entitled to the space they occupy. Dumbledore was already seated. He wore deep purple robes and his half-moon spectacles and the expression of a man who has decided that composure is the most strategic thing available to him. He looked at them when they entered. His eyes moved, Gomez, Morticia, Wednesday, and settled on Harry. Something moved behind the blue gaze, complex and fast. Then the composure reasserted. McGonagall was in the gallery, Wednesday noticed. Not in the chamber itself, not in an official capacity. In the gallery, which was for observers and members of the public, which meant she was here because she wanted to be, not because she had to be. She met Wednesday's eyes briefly and then looked away. Amelia Bones was at the center chair of the judicial panel, which was where the head of the DMLE sat during hearings. She was broad-shouldered, severe-looking, with a monocle and the expression of someone who had been preparing for this for longer than today. She caught Gomez's eye when he sat and gave him a nod that was barely perceptible and entirely meaningful. Sirius Black was not there. He was still in Azkaban, technically. The writ was moving. Cousin Lionel had said 2 days, maybe 3. Wednesday had noted the timing and worked around it. His presence wasn't needed for the hearing, only his case file, which was present in 30 pages of documentation. The session was called to order by the court scribe, a small nervous man who clearly found this particular hearing more stressful than the average, and Amelia Bones began. She was excellent. Wednesday had expected competence and found something better, a mind that organized itself publicly and clearly, that laid out the procedural history of the matter with the precision of someone who had been reading very carefully and was done being diplomatic about what she'd read. She walked the chamber through the timeline, the guardianship filing, the date relative to the deaths, the irregularities, the wills, the vault management, the ward analysis, the 10 years. The chamber was quiet with the specific quality of rooms full of people who are being told something they can't entirely dismiss and are deciding how to feel about not being able to dismiss it. Then Gomez stood. Wednesday had seen her father argue cases before. Civil disputes, estate battles, the occasional criminal matter that had interested him enough to take pro bono. She knew his rhythm, the warmth that established credibility, the precision that built the case, the moments where he let the facts be louder than any commentary on them. She knew he was excellent. She had not previously watched him argue something he was personally furious about. He didn't show the fury. That was the thing. It was entirely absent from his surface, he was warm and measured and precise and entirely comfortable. But it was there underneath, audible to anyone who knew him, in the specific care he brought to each sentence, the way he let certain facts breathe rather than rushing past them, the way he occasionally paused, just a half-second, to allow the weight of a particular piece of evidence to settle before he moved on. He started with the wills. He produced certified copies, filed them with the chamber record, and read aloud the relevant sections. Lily Potter's wishes. James Potter's wishes. The explicit exclusion of Petunia Dursley. The explicit naming of Sirius Black. The secondary and tertiary provisions. He read them in his warm, clear voice and the chamber listened and no one spoke. Both parents, Gomez said, when he'd finished, wrote documents that expressed clearly what they wanted for their son. Those documents had legal weight under both Muggle and magical inheritance law. They were not followed. I want to ask the chamber to sit with that for a moment, not as a legal abstraction, but as a fact about a mother and a father who took the time to write down what they wanted, and whose wishes were overridden by a single authority acting on his own judgment. He paused. Moving on. He went through the guardianship filing. The date irregularities. The Gringotts statement, which he submitted and requested be read into the record. Sharpclaw had provided a written statement that was 4 paragraphs of goblin directness, which meant it was also 4 paragraphs of legal demolition, and the chamber heard it read by the court scribe in a way that became increasingly uncomfortable with each successive sentence. He went through the ward analysis. The degradation. The documented dates that showed the ward functioning below minimum effective threshold for at least 3 years prior to Harry's discovery at Privet Drive, which meant that the primary argument for the placement, Harry's protection, had not been materially served for years, and the placement had continued anyway. He submitted the photographs of the cupboard. He had obtained them from a magical forensic analyst who had visited number 4 Privet Drive on Gomez's behalf, with Amelia Bones's authorization. Photographs of the space. Photographs of the lock. The chamber looked at the photographs. In the plum-colored tiers, something shifted. You could see it happening, the composite expression of a room full of people whose position on a situation is changing in real time. Not dramatically. Not all of them. But enough. The people who had come uncertain were becoming decided. The people who had come decided were finding their certainty either confirmed or destabilized depending on which direction they'd been pointing. Dumbledore had been still through all of it. Now he rose to address the chamber, which was his right as a member, and the chamber's attention shifted to him with the automatic gravity of long habit. He was, Wednesday observed with complete objectivity, very good. He acknowledged the irregularities. He didn't dismiss them. He was too intelligent for that, too aware that dismissal in the face of documented evidence made you look dishonest rather than correct. He contextualized them. He explained them, the urgency of the post-war period, the threat that remained, the genuine complexity of the decisions he'd made under genuine pressure. He spoke about Lily Potter with a grief that was, Wednesday thought, real. He spoke about his intentions for Harry with the specific warmth of someone who genuinely believed, in some sense, what he was saying. He was very good. And he was losing. Wednesday could see it in the chamber. Not because Gomez was performing better, both of them were excellent, in their different ways. Dumbledore was losing because the facts were arrayed against him, and no amount of contextualizing changed what the photographs showed or what the Gringotts statement said or what the wills contained. The edifice of his authority, built on the assumption that he had always acted correctly, that his judgment was trustworthy, that the institutional structures he occupied had been well used, was cracking under the weight of documentation. A man could survive being wrong. Dumbledore had survived worse. What he couldn't survive, in this room, today, was being shown to have been wrong in ways that were systematic rather than occasional, deliberate rather than inadvertent, and covered rather than corrected. When Dumbledore sat down, Amelia Bones said, "Does Harry Potter wish to address the chamber?" Harry stood. The chamber went absolutely still. He was small, standing there, 10 years old, still on the thin side despite 6 weeks of Lurch's cooking, in his dark trousers and his grey shirt, with his ridiculous hair and his green eyes behind his taped glasses. He looked around the chamber at all the faces looking at him. He didn't look at Dumbledore. "I don't have a legal argument," he said. His voice was clear and steady. "Mr. Addams has the legal argument. I just wanted to say something." Nobody spoke. "I was in a cupboard," Harry said. "I know that's been said already. I'm saying it again because I think it needs to be said by me." He paused. "I was in a cupboard and the door had a lock on the outside. I didn't have my own room. I didn't have enough food. I was smaller than other children my age because of it. The people I lived with hit me sometimes. Not often. But sometimes." His voice didn't waver. "I thought that was normal. I thought that was just what it was like. I didn't know there was anything else." The chamber was the specific silence of a room that is not going to interrupt. "I'm not saying this to make anyone feel bad," Harry continued. "I'm saying it because for 10 years a story was told about me. That I was safe and loved and protected. And that story was told by a specific person, to specific people, and everyone who heard it just believed it. Because it was coming from someone they trusted." He looked at Dumbledore now, directly, without performance. "I don't think he's evil. I don't think he wanted me to suffer. I think he decided that what he wanted for the future was more important than what was happening to me in the present. And I think when powerful people make that trade and nobody stops them, it keeps happening." He looked back at the chamber. "I'm here," he said. "I'm alive and I'm okay. Better than okay. Because someone came. Because Wednesday opened the door." He paused. "I'm asking you to open the door too. The one about Sirius Black, who never got a trial. The one about what the right person in the right position can do when nobody checks them." He looked down for just a moment, then back up. "That's it. Thank you." He sat down. Wednesday did not look at him, because looking at him would have made this a moment about her response to it, and it wasn't. She looked at the chamber. She looked at the faces. Several people were doing something with their hands, adjusting robes, pressing fingers to mouths, the physical language of people managing emotion. McGonagall, in the gallery, was looking at Harry with the expression of a woman paying a debt she'd been carrying for years. Hagrid, who had apparently also come to the gallery, how had she missed Hagrid? The man was enormous, had his enormous face in his enormous hands. Amelia Bones called for the vote. The Wisengamot voted. It took 11 minutes, which for a chamber of this size and the complexity of the matter was notably fast. Fast meant the outcome had been clear to the majority before the vote was called. Wednesday had known this would be the case, she'd counted heads before the session began, and the arithmetic was solid. But knowing the outcome analytically and watching it happen were different experiences. The results: Harry Potter's guardianship designation was formally voided. Gomez Addams, acting as blood-connected family, was recognized as legal guardian under the old blood accord provision. The fraudulent guardianship filing of 1981 was entered into the permanent record with notation of its procedural failures. A formal inquiry into the management of Harry Potter's welfare during the period 1981 to 1991 was opened, to be overseen by the DMLE under Amelia Bones. Sirius Black was granted an emergency review hearing to be conducted within 5 days, with a temporary suspension of his Azkaban confinement pending the review, conditional on magical house arrest, to be served, on his own request that cousin Lionel had filed preemptively, at Addams Manor. Albus Dumbledore retained his positions. This was not a criminal finding and the hearing had not been convened as one. He was not stripped of his titles, his Hogwarts post, his seat on the Wisengamot. He was not imprisoned or sanctioned in any formal legal sense. He was, instead, something worse. He was on record. Everything he'd done was in the permanent record of the highest magical court in Britain. Every decision, every filing, every choice that had prioritized his plan over a child's welfare. Not as accusation, as evidence, tested and entered. The kind of thing that didn't go away, that anyone could access, that historians would find. The kind of record that changed the shape of a reputation not through violence but through clarity. When the session was adjourned and the chamber began to move, Dumbledore came to them. Not with aggression and not with performance. He came quietly, which was the thing Wednesday had least expected and most respected, and he stood in front of Harry with the blue eyes doing something she hadn't seen them do before, simply being present, without strategy, without management. "I did what I thought was right," he said. "I know," Harry said. "That's the problem." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Gomez. "You will take care of him," he said. "We already are," Gomez said. "The threat is real," Dumbledore said. "Voldemort, what's coming, we know," Gomez said. "We've read the prophecy. We've read everything." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "Harry will face what he has to face. But he'll face it as himself, not as a weapon you forged, not as a hero shaped by deliberate deprivation. As himself. With his family behind him." He paused. "Whatever that produces is going to be considerably more formidable than what your method would have made." Dumbledore looked at Harry once more. Something in his face was different now, the composure still there but something underneath it had shifted, the specific shift of a man who has genuinely heard something that hasn't finished working on him yet. "Your mother," he said to Harry, quietly, she would be very pleased." Harry looked at him. The green eyes were steady and clear and complicated in the way of someone who has decided not to be simple about a complicated thing. "I know," Harry said. "I'll try to be worth it." Dumbledore nodded once. Then he left the chamber with the particular walk of a man who had come in expecting to manage something and was leaving with more to think about than he'd arrived with. It wasn't defeat. Wednesday turned the word over and set it aside because it wasn't the right word. It was something more permanent than defeat. It was accountability, met and recorded. It was the beginning of a different kind of reckoning in Dumbledore himself, one that didn't have a verdict yet. She found she could live with that. Outside the ministry, in the grey London afternoon, they stood on the pavement and the city went about itself around them and Harry had his hands in his pockets and was looking at the sky the way people look at the sky when they need a moment that isn't the inside of a room. Morticia put her arm around him. Not asking permission. Not making it significant. Just putting her arm around him the way you'd put your arm around someone who was yours and who had just done something hard. He leaned into it slightly. Just slightly. The lean of someone who was still learning that this was allowed. What happens next? Pugsley had asked him that morning, before they'd left, in Pugsley's direct and entirely unself-conscious way. Harry had thought about it. Hogwarts, he'd said. Eventually. In September. And before that, he'd looked around the entrance hall of Addams Manor, at the portraits and the thorny garland and thing moving through on the way to somewhere and the general particular atmosphere of the place that had become, over 6 weeks, the shape of home. More of this, he'd said. I want more of this. More training. Pugsley had said. More everything, Harry had said. Standing on the London pavement, Morticia's arm around his shoulders, Gomez on his other side already on the phone with cousin Lionel about the Black Review hearing, Wednesday beside him watching the street, he said nothing and didn't need to. The silence was the good kind, the kind that didn't need filling. Then he said, very quietly, the particular quietness of someone saying something for the first time, Aunt Morticia. She didn't make it a thing. She didn't react with the warmth that would have embarrassed him or the neutrality that would have diminished it. She simply turned her head slightly and said, "Yes." "Thank you," he said. She looked at him, with those deep, still eyes that saw things accurately. "You are family," she said. "It isn't thanks. It's just what is." He nodded. He looked at the sky again. Across from them, the grey London street was doing what London streets do, moving, indifferent, full of people going somewhere. In the wizarding world, news would be spreading from the chamber outward. The Quibbler would have a piece tomorrow. The Prophet would do what the Prophet would do. Pureblood families would be recalibrating. The Ministry would be watching the wind. Dumbledore would be thinking. Severus Snape, somewhere, was probably being difficult about his feelings in the way of people who have too many of them and nowhere appropriate to put them. Sirius Black, in Azkaban, would receive word today. Would know that in 5 days he'd be out. Would know that somewhere, in a house with dead trees and a watching gargoyle, a room was being prepared. Fester had already volunteered to help set it up, which meant it would be either exactly right or extremely strange, and those two categories were not mutually exclusive at Addams Manor. And Harry Potter, who had been in a cupboard, who had been small and hungry and locked, who had been made to be invisible and had instead become more visible than anyone had planned, was standing on a London pavement in clothes that fit him, with an owl at home on his bedpost and a wand in his pocket and a family that had declared him worth declaring. Gomez hung up the phone. "Lionel says the review is set for Monday," he told them. "The Magical House arrest terms are already filed. Sirius Black will be at Addams Manor by Tuesday." He paused. "I should warn Fester about preparing the room." "I already told Fester to prepare the room," Wednesday said. "I already warned Fester what that means," Morticia said. Gomez looked between his wife and his daughter. "Have you two been coordinating without telling me?" "We coordinate constantly," Wednesday said. "You're told the parts you need." "The parts won, cara mia, are you hearing this?" "I hear everything," Morticia said serenely. "I agree with her." Gomez opened his mouth. Looked at them both. Looked at Harry, who was looking back at him with the barely contained expression of someone fighting a grin. "Don't," Gomez said, pointing. The grin won. Harry laughed, the full version, the one that used his whole face and wasn't apologizing for itself and sounded like something that had been waiting to be that large for a very long time. It rang off the London pavement and Morticia smiled and Gomez made the sound he made when he was surrendering to something joyful, and Wednesday watched all of it from her position beside him and said nothing because there was nothing to say that would be better than this. The case was filed. The record was clear. The feud was satisfied in the way blood feuds were satisfied, not with destruction but with accounting, with the debt named and entered and answered and the wronged party recognized. The Addams family walked to their car. Lurch had it running. The city moved around them. Harry Potter walked with his family down a London street, his shoulders straight and his hands loose and his face open in the way of someone who has stopped waiting for the cost of the good thing. He got in the car. Wednesday got in beside him. Gomez and Morticia in front. Lurch pulled into traffic with the calm authority of someone who had been navigating complicated terrain for decades and found this, like most things, entirely manageable. "Wednesday," Harry said, as they moved through the city. "Your family is completely insane," he said. "Yes," she said. "I mean that as a compliment." "I know," she said. "It's the correct way to mean it." He looked out the window at the city going by. "I don't want to go to the Dursleys again," he said. Not with fear. Just with the flat clarity of someone stating a preference as a fact. "You won't," she said. "Ever?" "Not unless you choose to," she said. "And even then, not alone." He was quiet for a moment. "And Dumbledore will be managed," she said. "He'll try again. Not through institutions, now that those are closed to him. He'll try through relationships, through Harry himself, through the school. He'll be patient and intelligent and genuinely believe he's doing the right thing. That's not going to stop. She paused. But he knows now who he's dealing with. And he knows we're not going anywhere. Neither am I, Harry said. No, Wednesday said. You're not. Outside, London gave way to the motorway and the motorway to the country roads and the country roads to the particular turning that led down the long driveway with its dramatic dead trees and its watching gargoyle and its house that was larger than it had any right to be and which held, inside itself, something that was not magic exactly but was also not magic. The house appeared at the end of the drive. Harry saw it and something in his face did what it did every time he came back to it, a small, involuntary relaxing, a letting go of something he hadn't known he'd been holding. The specific physical language of a person who recognizes home. Lurch parked. They got out. The front door was already open, Pugsley, on the doorstep, with what appeared to be a small controlled explosion device behind his back that he was absolutely not hiding. Fester leaning in the doorway behind him eating something. Thing visible on the entrance table, upright and attentive. Well? Pugsley said. We won, Harry said. Pugsley's face did several things in quick succession, settling finally on an expression of profound satisfaction that manifested physically as him setting off the small device he'd been hiding, which produced a loud bang and a shower of confetti that was, on close inspection, black and deep purple rather than the usual celebratory colors. I made that this morning, Pugsley said. In case. It's very you, Harry said. Thank you. I thought so. They went inside. The house received them the way it always did, warmly and strangely and without apology for either quality, the particular atmosphere of a place that was exactly itself and made room for you within that rather than adjusting itself to accommodate you. Harry had stopped finding this uncomfortable 3 weeks ago. Now he found it right. He went up to his room and sat on the bed and Hedwig arrived from wherever she'd been and settled on his shoulder and he sat for a moment with the window light on his hands in his lap and thought about the chamber and what he'd said and how it had felt to say it. Not performed. Just said. On the wall across from his bed, he'd tacked something the week before, a small photograph that Gomez had obtained through channels he hadn't explained. His parents, together. James and Lily Potter, both laughing at something off camera, in what looked like a garden on a summer day, young and alive and full of something uncomplicated. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. I think you'd like it here, he told them. Not out loud. Just in the way you say things that matter when you don't need anyone to hear them. I think you'd like them. A pause. I like them. Hedwig made a soft sound. Below, the house went on about its business, Fester in the kitchen with Lurch, Pugsley back to his workshop, Gomez in his study already writing the follow-up documentation for Sirius's hearing, Morticia somewhere in the East Wing with the specific quiet of a woman doing something that didn't require announcement. Wednesday was in the library. She'd been in the library within 10 minutes of returning home, because there was always something to read and the case was moving and she was already thinking 2 steps ahead of today. She sat at the large oak table with the moving stars above her and the family trees spread to one side and her notebook open to a fresh page and wrote at the top of it, in her clear, precise hand, what comes next. Below that, she made a list. Not of threats. More actions Claude Sonnet 4.